Welcome to Mavericks of Marty. I'm Marty Kodesh, your host. Today I have with me Reverend Odell Cleveland, Bill Goebel, and Deshawn Adams, and we're going to talk about race. You've got two black Democrats and two white Republicans having what most people would think would be a very difficult and awkward conversation. So it's nice to have them in here today to talk about this difficult topic honestly and openly. We're friends in a way that we can have these sorts of discussions. It's something that not everyone has, and I wish more people did have. Bill and Odell have this cool concept for a podcast called Common Ground. And on that show, they take people with differing ideas and differing opinions, and they bring them together to find common ground, to see, how they can agree upon things rather than just disagree. And so Bill and Odell will often describe their podcast as a white Republican and a black Democrat coming together to find common ground. In my own personal life, Deshawn Adams started as a mentee of mine through Dustin's Greenhouse, and has become, in some ways, a mentor for me on various issues. And now we're good friends, and we have a chance to have conversations and talk to each other in a way that we really are seeking to understand the other person's opinion. Because oftentimes we don't agree, and that's okay. And we can have these conversations where we don't agree and yet still seek to understand the other person's perspective and do that in a respectful way. We have a candid conversation about Black Lives Matter and what it means both in terms of just the statement and the various organizations involved and the movement overall. Of course, Black Lives Matter, and I don't feel the need to add any sort of additional stance on that about other lives or anything else. Black lives do matter, and police brutality is bad. No one wants police brutality out there at all. Deshawn has a chance to talk about observations he made during our trip to Africa and what it was like when I was there with him and what it was like with the people in Africa.
I know you don't like me to say this, but one thing that's always stuck to me was when there was no lights, camera in action, when no one was there to, dispute your perspective in a blog, what I remember is Marty spending literally hours plowing the land of this community with his own hands. And seeing him, again, through the stage that I saw him as a teenager, right? A white, multi-millionaire man, humble enough to look at this community of African people and to plow their land with his hands and sweat. Like for me, that signified just the essence of what I believe Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowry is talking about when it comes to servant leadership.
We talk about breaking down barriers.
This is a huge deal, breaking down these barriers. It's not easy. So make it simple. Pick one person that you can start a relationship with and have conversations. Just somebody that's different than you, that's not in the same circle, that gives you a different set of lenses to look through. And be patient. When they say things that will set you off, just settle down and go have a bourbon or a beer or a glass of wine. And if you don't drink, go out and have dinner and break over bread. And find that common ground that you can find with people.
We talk about how you can most effectively come into a community if you hope to affect change.
A lot of times when people come into a community, I don't care if it's east side of Greensboro or Africa or Zimbabwe or any community, when you come in to help, if we're not careful, we'll come in saying, hey, we can come in and solve your problems. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And in a way, it's our arrogance of trying to help, because I've been guilty of that on numerous occasions versus asking the question, how can we help you?
We talk about what it's like to learn from various cultures. If you have the mindset of going in and you're learning from the cultures and you're exposing yourself to new things, you're more likely to be in a dialogue like what we're having now, a reasoned dialogue discussion. And you don't take it personally. You want to learn new things. You want to hear what the other side has to say in a discussion. We talk about what it's like to have relationships with people that truly differ from you in terms of background or political affiliation or race.
But I think the reason why I have been able to understand and to really have strong and rich relationships with Marty, as an example, is because we have a real relationship.
Right.
And so I think the problem is when you lack relationship, you lack awareness, you lack the ability to explore, your own thoughts and opinions and beliefs, as me and Marty do over time, right? In all of the conversations we have, we lack, accountability in relationships. So if Marty posts something and I disagree, Marty knows Deshawn is going to be texting or calling me to say, yo, what was that? And so, but we're only able to do that, right? And we'll laugh about it. We'll chat about it. Hell, we'll have a beer about it.
And as you'll find in most difficult conversations, it's peppered with humor. We have a chance to laugh and joke with each other while we're having these difficult conversations because, you need some comic relief to break up your difficult conversation and make it a little bit easier to go down, kind of like honey with your medicine.
So our show is about, it's called Finding Common Ground with Bill and Odell. It's a black Democrat that grew up in the projects of Charleston, single mom, segregation, and whose great-great-grandparents were slaves. And even has a story about supposedly one of his relatives cooked for the Ku Klux Klan. So it's kind of an interesting. And I come from an all-white community in Ohio. There were no black people. And if a black person came through town, they usually stopped them and asked them what they were doing there. And if they didn't have business, they'd escort them out of town. So we talk about our differences are, and then we come together for common ground. And we've done, I think, 57 shows now, and we're in 24 countries in every state in the union.
Love that.
How did y'all meet?
I'm sure there's lots of stories there.
Oh, yeah. You want to tell them how we met?
Yeah, Deshawn, Odell, how you doing?
He's the good-looking black
Good,
guy.
how are you, Odell?
Yeah, man. I'm just pimping ain't easy, Sean. Pimping ain't easy. Pimping ain't easy.
I know. I'm trying to grow up to be more like y'all, man. The only thing I lack is being good looking.
Exactly. Bill came to me, Lucky 32. Bill was on the Boy Scout board directors leadership, and he somehow contacted me and said, "Hey, do you know of someone who we could find who would serve on the Boy Scout board of directors?" And I listened for a minute and I asked him, I said, "Bill, what's your agenda?" He said, I don't have an agenda. I said, "Okay, I have one." And I just went into the whole thing on, I'd rather support, the Boy Scouts having a young black male in a Boy Scout uniform for $300 is more beneficial than having a young black male in a orange jumpsuit in the penal system that's costing $30-something thousand a year. So we went from there. Bill was very direct to the point, and I really like dealing with white folks who are straight to the point, Marty. That's why I like dealing with you, because as a black person, a lot of times when you deal with white people, talking riddles and circles and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, come on, man, let's just talk. That's kind of how me and Bill kind of hit it off.
And then the wives got together and they liked each other, so we were toast at that point.
Yeah, next thing you know, we're on a plane going to Paris. Yeah,
Yep.
So it is what it is. So Deshawn, what do you know? What do you know about the show? What do you know about Marty's podcast? What did he tell you? See if he told you the same thing he told us.
He basically said, "I know Odell and Bill. I just was on their podcast a couple of weeks ago. I know you. We have conversations like this all the time. I know from y'all's podcast that y'all explore, to your points already, explore topics around, race, around, kind of equality or equity. Obviously different perspectives, bringing different folks in. I did listen to a couple of your shows. But basically about his podcast, He was like, yo, I know a couple people want to get in the room, want to explore more, about how to have difficult conversations in community is what he told me. Is that right, Marty?
Yeah, I think that's about right in terms of
Okay.
this particular show. And then just overall, I think I've settled on this idea of Kick-Ass Concepts presents Mavericks with Marty. So the idea of
Love it.
independent thinkers coming on the show and talking about why they think differently than the group, why they don't conform with what everybody tells you to think, but are more open for conversations and discussions. And I think those are the people I'd want to spend time, an hour or two talking in a podcast versus people that are just, only stuck in their one mindset or feel like they have to comply or be canceled, that they're willing to speak up and take a different perspective. And also people that can have a reasoned conversation for an hour and not feel attacked or vilified or feel the need to attack personally back and forth. And we've obviously had a ton of conversations over the years on a host of topics, some about wine selection and fun stuff, and some about more difficult topics. So,
right.
So I was telling Bill and Odell how we met and a little bit about Dustin's greenhouse. You want to give them your version of the story on that, on how we met?
Yeah, let's do it. As I mentioned before, Marty and I think we've probably known each other now somewhere close to 12 years, maybe a little bit more than that. But we met, I want to say back in 2010. I was in high school at the time, actually. And so a little bit about my story and like the program, Dustin's Greenhouse itself, was founded by Martin and Lou Green, who are entrepreneurs in the Greensboro area. I believe they now moved to Wilmington, North Carolina. But essentially, they would have a program where they believed strongly, in recognition of their son, in helping young students develop a broader perspective beyond perhaps what they've seen in their day-to-day communities, maybe their families, etc. And so for me, in the context of my story, I come from, I believe it was Odell's story, coming from a single parent household where my mom actually, was definitely in what, on paper would be a low income, tax bracket. But at the same time, I definitely was born in a house full of love, full of joy, really developed a strong sense of self. I use that context to say, even though I did come from, a low income, less privileged background, that was definitely the context of my world in high school. And so I was sort of a student, I'm originally from Greensboro, North Carolina, went through the Guilford County Schools District and had some challenges along the way. I mean, everything from school suspensions for violence or fighting to, being in circumstances where, I remember one time it was just my mouth got me in trouble, right? I've always been trying to advocate for myself and advocate for others, but sometimes that was to my detriment. So I remember this one time I was actually suspended from school, came to school during suspension and was suspended again on top of that. So that tells you a little bit about the type of teenager I was at the time. I also, was not at the time thinking about college more seriously. Obviously it was something that people taught me that, hey, to get a head in life and to create a life for yourself, college is important. But I really hadn't thought, super deeply about it at that time. Another thing, I was born and raised on the southeast part of Greensboro. So you can imagine Dudley High School. My parents, my mom, my aunt, who also raised me, lived 2 blocks from Blueford Elementary. I went to Lincoln and Harrison Middle School and graduated from a middle college called GTCC in High Point. And so that's, again, just a little bit of context of where I was in 2010. I think the purpose of that.
You left out, Deshawn, a pretty significant part, which is that you founded and started a whole mentoring program along with, I think, 2 co-founders and impacted a ton of kids' lives while you were in high school.
That's true, Marty. That was after my Reformation years. I was like, yo, I'm done trying to do things my way. Definitely want to tap into just more positivity and creating, at that point I felt like I had good grades. I was definitely on trajectory to go to college. But I wanted to kind of create an opportunity for other students who may come from underprivileged from less privileged backgrounds to have an opportunity to talk to a mentor. So you're right, Marty. I started a Succeed mentorship program with my best friends, Kendall McDowell, and a couple of other folks. And really our mission was to get high school students to spend their time in elementary and middle school classes to just talk to kids about, decision making. And, obviously there was a behavioral aspect to that. We also did some academic work. That program, to your point, Marty, actually was highlighted by Maurice Mo Green, who was the superintendent at the time. He used that as his State of the Union address as like a best example of what students should do. And obviously in my case, what students could become. And so we use that program as a launch pad into, again, creating opportunities for other students. So that's where I was in 2010 when.
And Deshawn, that had was it 1,200 kids that had been helped by that?
Wow.
Yeah, there were hundreds of kids. So we actually created, I didn't know what a business model was at the time. Marty definitely helped me develop that over the years, but we developed sort of a light business model, I'll call it, where we targeted schools that were either Title I or schools that were, not achieving success in the way, according to North Carolina school standards. So we started and targeted those types of schools. But yeah, Marty, it was hundreds of students who were impacted. And we had about 45 high school volunteers who were part of that program, which for a school of only 150, 200 kids, that was most of our school were participating in that program.
What did they do in your program? What did they do?
The high school students or the elementary and middle school ones?
Well, let's start with elementary and middle school and then go to high school. Yeah.
So they were really, we didn't know what we were doing, as I mentioned before, but essentially we started off as doing, math, focusing on math literacy and reading literacy. And so we worked with each school principal as well as their curriculum facilitators to develop, light strategies around, additional prep work. So we went into their classes. We obviously, helped with things like reading skills or reading competency. We focused on where students were in their reading grade level. And then from the math aspect, we did the exact same thing. We focused on, creating more, more support for their math curriculum. But that was the academic component. The sort of interpersonal piece was really around just having real honest conversations about decision making, meaning, we also had students who, our principals would identify as struggling in school. Maybe they had several issues in their home lives. Mm-hmm. There was actually one school, I won't name it just for the sake of trying to keep it a little bit anonymous, but there was one school that had a lot of refugees actually in Guilford County schools. And so we worked with a lot of those students to think about how to transition into the U.S. What does it mean to be a refugee student coming into Guilford County schools? How to work on things like English language learning. So it was really a wide array of topics that we covered. We also had a worksheet that we asked the high school students to walk through that was really focused on, behavior and what is good behavior, right? And how do we, become, studious and, what are the things, at that point, it was a little early for elementary kids, but for middle school students, we focused on hey, have you thought about college, right? What would that look like? What do you think you would need? Who are the types of people that you would need in your circle? What type of support you would need? So it was really a light curriculum that we had developed, but I do think the success was both from a student's perspective. We had parents reaching out, telling us that it was a great program for their students and that they were glad that they were enrolled. The school district, again, Maurice Green, the superintendent at the time, he actually used that as one of the barometers through which the service learning component for high school students is now a part of what students have to do to complete graduation. And then for the high school students, which, I was a high school student myself, I mean, honestly, just beyond it feeling good to be able to give back in that way, it really helped us think about the service or servant leadership model right? What does it mean to be a servant? What does it mean to, give up your time, your talent? Also talk about treasure in some cases. But what does it mean to give up a little bit to really gain leadership skills? And so it helped me develop as a young leader at that time, still a young leader, but really that was also some of what other students said it did for them. So I'll stop there. I know I said a lot. Y'all definitely keep cutting me off. I talk a lot.
So I met Deshawn through Dustin's greenhouse, and like he said, it was set up originally for in honor of their son, Martin and Lou Green's son, Dustin, who died tragically, but who had been impacted by travel to another country. And they felt like that could impact other high school kids' lives and give them a broader perspective of the world if they took them on a trip to a third world country. And so for Deshawn and I, that was South Africa in 2010. And Deshawn was one of the 10 students that went over, and I was one of the mentors that went over at that time. And we went to Cape Town, had a chance to meet Archbishop Desmond Tutu, had a chance to go great white shark diving in a cage.
That was fun.
And throw up. Everybody threw up because of the boat. Yeah, it was awful.
Definitely.
You were chumming.
We were chumming the water,
You were chumming.
The hardest,
right.
When you think about going shark diving, what they don't tell you is that cage has gaps in it. So when you're sitting there swimming, you're worried that your hand or your foot is sticking outside the cage because it could easily go out. Yeah. And then they also don't tell you getting in and out of the boat into the cage from the top with a rocking boat in the water. You have a real risk of falling into the water and not getting into the cage. Oh, and then the third problem is you don't have air in there except for, a snorkel. And in a rocky water, the boat's hitting, the cage is hitting, water's getting, you're taking in salt water.
Oh my goodness.
It's,
it's pretty hazardous.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Something I enjoy doing.
I'm still trying to figure out the lesson learned there. What was the lesson learned? I'm still trying to figure out
how to throw up. I think that was about how to face your fears. Be glad you survived.
Holy cow.
Right.
And then we went to a shanty town in Cape Town. We went to Muffin, BC, and which is where Hands at Work Africa is, and then went to another village there and worked with a communal center, put in a well, put in a community garden, and then the kids got to go on to another trip to take a safari as well.
How many kids in total were there, and how many adults?
10 kids, 10 high school kids, and then four of us for adults: Lou, Martin, me, and oh my gosh, I'm blanking.
And Lynn Bergeron.
And Lynn, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And it was funded by the county or the school system?
Funded by Martin.
Oh, really?
Martin and Lou Green have this set up as a foundation, and they did that. They did fundraisers. We did a couple of fundraisers for them as well, and the mentors also contribute too.
Wow! So this is the first time some of these kids have been out of the country,
or some people the first time out of the Southeast.
Exactly.
Or flying on a plane.
Holy moly! Wow,
yeah.
What an experience! How long were you there?
3 weeks.
Woo! Yeah.
So it was a while. This was in 2010. And I think what I think it showed everyone was that when we think of poverty, we don't think of that level of poverty.
Right.
When you're seeing someone that has no running water, no electricity, I think probably the most impactful part of it was there were 2 women living on their own. So single mothers, the husbands were around, or not, wasn't the husbands, the fathers were around, but weren't involved. And they had probably 5 kids. Okay. And they were in a shack that I wouldn't store tools in. I mean, it was maybe 8 by 10, and you've got 6 people living in it.
Holy
no
God.
Running water, no electricity. You had another one where a woman was blind and she had no legs, and she would drag herself out, gather scraps she could find, weave mats out of them, and then sell them to tourists. You had another one where a guy was, a young guy was living on his own and no parents. He did have electricity, but no running water.
Holy cow.
And that gives you a comparative stick when you're thinking about how bad things can be in your life.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, Marty, to that point, one of the things that I found most powerful about the trip, we actually stayed, we had a host family, right, that we stayed with people in the village for a night or two. And when we, obviously we were there to, just learn more about the community and the people. But, for me personally, I think what I most gathered from that was just the resiliency of humanity. And, obviously in my case, I stayed with a host family and just learning more about, me, Marty, Khalil Lloyd, we all stayed in the same house. I'm forgetting his name at the time, Marty. You remember the gentleman's name you stayed with?
I don't.
I can't remember, but anyways, it was a gentleman, and he was telling us about his family. He was, basically raised himself. His father died of TB. His mom of HIV, in his community, and despite the fact that obviously to your point, Marty, it was extreme poverty in that case. A lot of us didn't come from places of wealth or ton of privilege or power. But for me, it reminded me of, two lines. As we went on this trip, we were also tasked with, learning a poem by William Ernest Henley called Invictus. And it really just kind of pointed back to the last two lines of that, which was, I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul. The reason that was most powerful to me is that, sure, there are lots of circumstances for all of us and for sure all of humanity, right, that dictate the type of life we ultimately, end up with. But knowing and centering on the fact that, the resiliency that each of us have, we just have to tap into, is where, what I was most reminded of through that experience of hey, what does it mean for me to truly be, not just the master of my fate, but really the captain of my soul? Because that, is definitely, regardless of people's religious backgrounds, in my opinion, that's kind of what centers and grounds us. But I think that's my main takeaway from the trip.
So they're still doing your program in Guilford County.
That's a good question. So you've got Lou and Martin Green that started this, and then their daughter Ashley as well. And then they had a couple other members that were kind of key leaders. And at one point, Martin and Lou handed that off to Deshawn. Do you remember that guy's name?
Freebird McKinney. He was a high school teacher at Grimsley High School. Yeah.
I'm not sure the current status of him working on that. Lou and Martin have moved down to Wilmington now, and I think Freebird is doing some of that. But Martin shifted his focus, and Lou, they did that for a number of years, but I think a couple of years ago they shifted more of their focus to traveling to areas like Peru or South Africa, and then trying to do more impact on the local residents there as well.
What's the name of the foundation or the agency?
Dustin's Greenhouse.
It's interesting. Very much so.
So have y'all been to a third world country, Odell and Bill?
Not really. We travel. We usually go to Paris or Israel or, I don't know, some may and may not call Jamaica third world country, but, when you go in there with the cruise ships and everything else, it's always interesting when you go to another culture, because a lot of times people see you as rich Americans, and to Deshawn's point that you're not rich, but when you go from America to someplace else, people perceive you as being rich because everyone has all these bias, prejudice, and stereotypes of America. And it's usually that everybody's rich in America, whether you're white, whether you're black, everyone's rich in America. But to you all's story, it brings me to this point. You learn a lot about people when you travel. So I was wondering some of the aha moments that you and Deshawn had when you all were traveling, because, 3 weeks is a long time to be around someone, and you look at things differently and you say things, and sometimes unintended consequences are still consequences. So you may look at some poor Black folk in Shantytown and say something, and you may mean it one way, or you may mean it the way one says it. And Sean looked at it, was like, wait a minute, man, I'm right up the street from Mount Zion down in, East Greensboro. I understand. So how did you all deal with those misunderstandings, Marty, when you all were going through looking at poor people of color? How did y'all deal with that?
I really don't remember anything where we had anything like that. I mean, I think over the years, Deshawn and Martin have had a few more misunderstandings maybe than Deshawn and I have.
Yeah.
Because they're both passionate and they both sometimes will kind of speak and get into a little bit of a tiff about things, a little tit for tat on commentary. And Martin does that. I've learned over the years to kind of temper how I approach things and make sure I keep things about ideas and concepts instead of letting it get personal on some of these. I think that's one of the key things for just a reasoned debate. But Mark's very passionate. Deshawn's very passionate. So I think they're almost like a father-son out there a little bit on the trip with a little bit of that headbutting. But
I like your description, Marty. Passion. I'm definitely passionate and am willing to have conversations and like go all the way there with anybody, right? But back to your question, Odell, around like what if anything was an aha moment on the trip. I think I've never thought like super intently about it, but I will say one thing that just came to mind for me, Marty. You remember when we went, right? We all sort of as a part of like going into the village, especially see it's Tuca as an example. One of the things we did was but we basically offered up, different sort of toiletries and different personal items for the community to use. I was actually very blessed and lucky that Mount Zion Baptist Church, Odell, which I know you'll appreciate, was actually helped me carry, I want to say like 3 military duffel bags of like tons of toiletries through a campaign that our church had did. And I took those actually over to Africa with me. But one aha moment that I had was, I remember there was a gentleman who was coming to the community center there, and we were, obviously we had different, feminine care products, and we had toothpaste and toothbrush and all these different things. And there was a moment, I don't even know if we've spoken about this, Marty, but the moment where there was a gentleman actually who came up and looked at the toothpaste and like he peels the cap back. He opens it up and kind of looks at it. He looks at me. He looks at the toothpaste, and it's kind of like, what is this used for? And what was interesting about that moment, I went on to explain to him, this is toothpaste. You put it on a toothbrush. You like circle around. All the things your mama taught you when you were growing up. Right. And when he kind of, when I went through the story, he kind of looked back at me and was like, well, why don't you just use like a tree? It was, in my work, for the lack of a better term, a tree twig. So he would go pick the branch or tree twig off and use that and chew on it all day. And so he was kind of saying back to me, this is something that like, I appreciate you bringing over and giving to us, but like, we're good. And so for me, I think like now that I'm a little bit farther along the way, I think that was just a moment where, especially when you're designing things for a community or thinking about like what's best for a certain part of town, et cetera, really taking into account what do the community say they need, I think is an aha moment. So I know it's like sort of, me weaving the through line there, but I think that was one thing for me as I look back of like, man, we brought toothpaste, which is a great thing, but is that truly what he needed, right? He's like, yo, I'm actually good. Like I can just use my current method. So I do think like looking back on to that situation, that's a lesson for me in the work that I do around, diversity, equity, inclusion of how do we design, to the unique needs of a community.
Tied into that, one moment that kind of hit me a couple different times. So when I got there, I was like, okay, let's go ahead and get this set up. Let's boost their marketing. Let's, I'd offered to put in like a computer room for Hands at Work Africa so that people could post about and kind of share their experience. When we were going to plow a certain or cut down a certain area, I was like, let's get weed eaters and this. And they, first of all, the rental prices were just crazy. They wanted if it was $1,000 weed eater, they wanted $1,000 deposit.
Holy cow.
But, and I was like, fine, okay, I'll do that and we'll do it. But they said, Hands at Work said, no, we don't want the computer lab. We don't want the weed eater because something's going to happen and it's going to need to be fixed.
Right.
And so they were very focused, rightly so. At the time, I didn't understand it, but now I do, on sustainability. So they didn't want to put something in place that was going to break a year later and then they didn't have people there to fix it, or it was going to be an ongoing cost. For them, rather than buying a weed whacker, they'd rather pay two guys $10 to go out and, cut the grass. And then, they're doing it with their machetes and they're sharpening that and there's no issues. And something's not going to get stolen or misplaced. It's $1,000. So, in the last revamp of Daryl's, that kind of reinforced it for me because, I can put things in, but then it's, how is it sustained and how is it maintained over time?
Well, I've got a story for you. You asked if we've been to third world countries. I've probably been to about 10. I've been to Cuba on a missions trip, and that was interesting. I was in communist Poland to adopt a girl, and that was another interesting thing. And then obviously I was been in South Africa, in Malawi, and at time Kenya and Uganda. And so I've been to a number of them, but the one that really stuck out, I was in charge of skincare at Unilever, and one of my brands was Vaseline petroleum jelly. And the biggest use of that product is in Black Africa. They use it as a skin coating. And I got a call one time from United Nations saying, we want to have you come to New York. We want to talk to you about a humanitarian program. And I said, okay. So we went up, and they said, we have a pill that one of the greatest causes of infant death, mortality, is diarrhea. And they're getting it from this water that's contaminated. And we have a pill that if they put it in the water, it kills the particular bacteria that causes the problem. And if we give it away, they don't take it because there's no value in it. They don't see any value. But if we could attach it to your Vaseline product, which is the number one selling item in Black Africa, as a gift with purchase, they'll see the value and they'll take it. So I think we did 18 million of those to put in. And one of my jobs was to go out into the country. And we had a promotion one time for Vaseline that they did in Malawi. And it was, and I've still got the poster, I should bring it in here. The grand prize was an ox. And the second prize was a plow. And the third prize were some picks. And it became the most popular, successful program in Malawi. And so the guy who won the ox was way out in the bush, and we couldn't transport it out there. And so one of the fellows said, well, let's put him in a helicopter. We'll drug him up, carry him in a sling, and carry him out to the pasture and put him down. So, we all went out there with our photos and getting ready, and we get this ox out there, and the whole tribe's out. And the guy wouldn't accept it. And we said, what's the problem? Well, it was drugged up. It was kind of, whacked out. It was wobbly. It's sick. I'm not putting it with my herd. It'll make my herd sick. And then I won't have a herd. So we tried to explain to him what we did. And it's kind of like your toothpaste. No, I don't get that.
Yep.
I don't get that. So we said, okay, would you wait till tomorrow? And if he's okay, will you accept him? And he says, oh yeah, I'll give you a day. So he had the witch doctor come out and do some stuff. It was crazy. We had to give the witch doctor $100 for this.
Wow.
Put that on a travel and expense report in a big corporation.
Right.
But
exactly.
To everyone's point, a lot of times when people come into a community, I don't care if it's east side of Greensboro or Africa or Zimbabwe or any community, when you come in to help, if we're not careful, we'll come in saying, hey, we can come in and solve your problems. Why don't you do
Correct.
this? Why don't you do that? And in a way, it's our arrogance of trying to help. because I've been guilty of that on numerous occasions, versus asking the question, how can we help you? Because a lot of times it's like, we are coming in to save you. And I remember when I started this nonprofit called Welfare Reform Liaison Project, one of the things that we work so hard on is putting brand new donated garments in a warehouse display area and allowing the families to come and pick and select for themselves, giving them that dignity, because they knew what they wanted for their children and themselves, versus saying, hey, here it is. You say you need a coat. Hey, take this, and you should be happy that you get it no matter what, And I think sometimes if we're not careful, not always, but sometimes if we're not careful, it becomes, we know best for you. You have nothing. You should be thankful for whatever we give you. And we miss the mark sometimes, because people want their, they want their pride to a certain degree, and they want their dignity. And sometimes we take that away from them.
Yeah, I love the word you use around arrogance. It's definitely what I think we kind of go in with sometimes. I mean, obviously, in political conversations in today's world, I think all of us probably need to kind of continue to check our own arrogance, our own experiences, and then think about, how do we even just like at a baseline communicate with the person that's right in front of me, but despite my personal beliefs, my political party, etc. But I do want to kind of link that to another thing that I want to point back to that Marty mentioned around, how we were plowing the community and going through, helping them essentially clear the land before we started the garden and before we kind of did that. It reminded me of, a quote when I went to Morehouse College. So I went to Morehouse. Marty, we have a story in that for sure, of me getting in and essentially going to Morehouse. But when I went to Morehouse, I essentially worked with a guy named Reverend Dr. Joseph Eccles Lowry.
Wow.
If you don't know who he is.
Wow, he's an icon,
definitely, man. Yeah, he's an icon. He recently passed away over the last 2 years, but I spent a lot of time in his house working with his organization here in Atlanta. But essentially, the long story short on him is he helped shape the 68 Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. And so he's very instrumental in that. But my point is, he had a saying that he would say to us as change agents, which is what we would call as student advocates. He said, a servant leader is somebody who's been, blessed or, fortunate enough to get a unique set of skills. But the challenge is to make sure that they are humble enough to reach people where they are, but yet you have to have some sort of job, right? So driven enough to support them to where they need to be. And so I think that's one reason me and Marty are constantly connected, because I do see, him as a servant leader. But the story I want to point to is Marty talked about, how we were thinking about what was best for the community in terms of plowing the land, and we went through the materials. But I'll tell you, one thing me and Khalil Lloyd, one of my good brothers from the trip, one of the things we always kept with us about Marty as an example is here we have, and I know he's really humble, he's going to hate that I'm saying this, but we have a man who is literally the CEO and founder in a lot of cases of multi-million-dollar businesses. And
multi-million-dollar businesses. Marty owes me $20, so he said he ain't got it. So you telling me Marty can pay me the $20 he owe me? Okay.
Wait a minute. We know who's buying lunch today.
Exactly.
Right. Lunch on Marty. Yeah, that's hilarious. Definitely. So Marty, I know you don't like me to say this, but one thing that's always stuck to me was when there was no lights, camera in action, when no one was there to dispute your perspective in a blog. What I remember is Marty spending literally hours plowing the land of this community with his own hands, and seeing him again through the phase that I saw him as a teenager, right? A white, multi-millionaire man, humble enough to look at this community of African people and to plow their land with his hands and sweat. Like for me, that signified just the essence of what I believe Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowry is talking about when it comes to servant leadership. And so I'm saying that not to brag on Marty. I mean, you're not that good looking, Marty. but to really say, man, what would the world look like when we do have leaders who are, again, humble, which is in juxtaposition to that arrogance you were speaking about, Odell?
Yeah, but it's interesting because that's the Marty that I saw. That's the piece that I had an opportunity to look behind the curtain and see that Marty. And that's the Marty I have really admired. And, but you're going to get the Marty first because Marty is Marty. We love that. But, it's interesting when you look at this show that he's doing, when you say independent thinkers and mavericks, when you become an independent thinker and a maverick, and all of a sudden, Deshawn, you didn't go with, okay, here's a rich white guy, so I know what he's about. And when you don't go along with the herd and you don't think that way, and you look at, usually it's three things: race, religion, and politics, on how one process that. And a lot of times, and I can speak as a black male, or older black male, 60, hopefully 62 years old very soon, is that I came up in a culture where if you were black, you had to be a Democrat, or if you were black, you had to hate white people. If you have to be a Baptist, or those type of things. And I kind of bucked all that. I look at a person as a person. We always want to quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, want to be judged by not the color of one's skin, but the content of one character. But a lot of times you could look at a Marty and you're like, I like what I see, when I evaluate what it is. Or you could look at a Bill, my companion, and it's like, I like what I see. They're good people. And people ask me, and I don't know, Sean, if they ask you, Odell, why do you hang around with white people? Or why do you have a white best friend? Or why do you, how do you handle that as an independent thinker? Because people look at you and like, listen, you, Uncle Tom, you trying to be white, all that craziness. When you like, white is not right, right is right. And a lot of times, whether you're black, white, and we're going to throw the green and yellow in there for political correctness. Right. It's like, I deal with folks, I rock with folks who rock with me. So how do you square with your black friends and other friends that you and Marty are boys?
Yep. That's a fantastic question. And I'll tell you, to sum it up, well, let me back up. You got to think that I understand the sentiment of like black folks around, like, why are you like, for lack of a better term again, socializing and putting your nose where the white folks' nose is, like, why y'all in communities together? What's behind that? And so for me, I think about just the historical context, right? There were good reasons why black and white people did not, especially for us as black people, why we did not trust relationships with white people based on the context of history, right? You could, be a business owner and be black, and let's just say for our case in the South, and have relationships with people like Marty or like a government official, and your business, was still at risk of being shut down or at the, expense of whatever the white man wanted to have for you, or, you know what I mean? And so it had real consequences for our families. Based on the historical context. And so I'm saying that to say I understand a little bit why there is this, distrust in our community. But I think the reason why I have been able to understand and to really have strong and rich relationships with Marty, as an example, is because we have a real relationship.
Right.
And so I think the problem is when you lack relationship, you lack awareness, you lack the ability to explore, your own thoughts and opinions and beliefs, as me and Marty do over time, right? In all of the conversations we have, we lack, accountability in relationships. So if Marty posts something and I disagree, Marty knows Deshawn is going to be texting or calling me to say, yo, what was that? And so, but we're only able to do that, right? And we'll laugh about it, we'll chat about it, hell, we'll have a beer about it eventually. But I think the reason why we're able to do that is because we have genuine relationship. And so my point, Odell, is the reason I think I'm able to do that is because, I've been able to cultivate relationships. But I'll be honest, I definitely had the same thoughts of like, man, what would this look like? Why would I, have a relationship or even have coffee or, whatever with people, with white people and with somebody like Marty, but even, so I say that to say like, that's how I think I'm able to cultivate it. I also come from the perspective of, look, I went to Morehouse College and HBCU in Atlanta, was able to, go through the English department actually. So studying the written language and just the historical context and all of the ways, right? All these concepts and belief systems is what I explored through my degree. And those things, like, I stand definitely firmly on Black Power as an example. And I don't mean that cool statement. I mean that I have a real acknowledgement that I'm very proud to be a Black man, and I don't see it as a barrier. Now, I do see it as a barrier in, a lot of different cases. Obviously, I'm not like on my own lone island, right? What I'm not saying is I can like pull myself up from my own bootstraps. And what I'm also not saying is I don't understand, context around, race and the wealth gap and all that. I get it. But what I do think is because of, being able to cultivate relationships with people who don't look like me, there's a level of trust and a level of honesty that I think we're able to have, where I feel people who usually come to us and say, like, why are you doing that? I always constantly check them and say, well, do you have friend groups that are, diverse, with people that don't look like you, that don't have the same money in the bank account as you? And so for me personally, I'm like very fortunate to say I have a combination of friends that span a lot of different races, a lot of different, socioeconomic status, etc. And I'm not saying I'm like, I got a white friend. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying because I make a point to be open and curious enough to explore what makes us different, I actually am continuing to find what makes us honestly the same from the perspective of, we're humans and collectively we all have like a purpose that we're trying to accomplish in life. Now, I know I said a lot in this. I know that I can definitely be debated on a lot of my points, but I think that's how, Odell, to sum it up.
Yeah, and I think, and we kick the mic to Marty and Bill, I think it's from a perspective of the peer pressure that your peers, whether you're frat or whether, Morehouse is a very powerful, prestigious institution. So congratulations on even getting in, and even more congrats on even getting out with a degree. Because like I tell my people all the time, it's easy to get in college, but it's hard to get out with that degree.
Oh, yeah.
So if we have the peer pressure, it's almost like, what does Black people say about white folks when white folks ain't around? But also, what does white folks say about Black folks when Black folks ain't around? Because I'm sure Marty had some people saying something to him, or Bill said something, people saying, hey, what do you hang out with that Black guy for all the time? So Marty, Bill, jump in and help us out here.
Well, I've been listening and a couple things jump out at me. The servant leadership part of it reflects on my background in scouting, because that's what we teach Eagle Scouts, to become servant leaders. And that's part of their charge when they become Eagle Scouts. It's, once they get to that level, they're not done. They're just getting started. Now they've got to go out in the community and serve as a leader, but serve as a servant leader as opposed to just a leader. And the other thing that jumped out at me in your conversation was understanding the differences of people's lenses and cultures. One of the things when you travel, you get to see things that, I'll give you an example. If you go to China, and I was there, and we were taught when you go there, if like I went to see Mao Zedong's tomb, and our group wasn't scheduled to do that. So I went to the tour people, and this was way, way before. I think it was in '82, right after it was open. So they didn't even have a lot of cars. They didn't have hotels. They had bicycles. It was really primitive. And so I asked our tour folks if we could do that, and they said that's going to be very difficult. Well, in the United States, in my culture, that means, okay, it's hard, but you're going to do it. Okay? You're going to figure a way to do it. Well, it's dishonorable to say no. So they were telling me no. That's the way they say no. So if I didn't understand that, I would have kept pressuring the fella for it. And instead, when he said it was very difficult, I understood that meant no, and I wasn't going to push him any further. About 3 days into the trip, I get a tap on the shoulder, and him and another communist member said, Bill, we're going to take you to see Chairman Mao. So we went, and he was in a glass casket. Most of communists do news. They cook you in a glass casket. So It's behind the Forbidden City. It's not in the front part. So we went there, and there must have been, 10,000 people in line.
Wow.
And they took us right up to the front, and I'm feeling uncomfortable about that. Here comes an American. And the Chinese tend to be very chatty, and they're very loud. But when we walked in that mausoleum, there was dead silence. And they allow you, they had guards and stuff, and they walk you through. And there he was. He was propped up in his glass casket, looked just like he does in his pictures.
Now you say propped up, like sitting in the chair propped up, Bill?
No, he was eating sushi. No, I'm teasing.
Don't start that, man. Go ahead.
No, he was in his casket, and they had the casket at an angle so you could see.
Gotcha.
So you didn't have to look into a casket. But things like that. I remember another time when we were in Croatia, Yugoslavia at the time, it was communist, and we went to an open market, and maybe it was Poland, I can't remember, one of those two countries when it was communist, but there were apples and fruits and vegetables. So we wanted to get some for our trip. So we went up to the cart and we started picking the ones we wanted. And the guy came and slapped our hands and took the fruit out. And the people we were with that lived there, he says, no, you don't touch the fruit in the communist country. You tell him how many you want. And if you want 10 apples, 2 of them will be rotten, because he has to get rid of the stuff. So 8 of them will be good. So if you want 10, you got to say 12. And it was part of the culture. Okay. That's the way. So I think the beauty of traveling and the beauty of communicating, like you and folks that you've come up against and met, and Marty and all that, is we start changing our lenses on our ability to communicate. And Marty made a point earlier, and I don't know if we were taping it, but he was talking about when there's confrontation and how he approaches it. He doesn't approach it personal. He talks about the things, okay? And in that way, the person doesn't get feeling they're being attacked and they have to start attacking back. And that's a learned trait. I mean, I don't think you started that way.
No, and I don't do it all the time. I slip up as well. But I agree with you. I think people that travel tend to be exposed to a lot of different things. They have to be comfortable in countries where they don't speak the language. They have to learn new customs like the apple picking. And you learn new ideas, you're exposed to things, and you don't come in. I think there's still this ugly American attitude where people come in and say, well, why don't you speak English? Or someone's speaking a different language, and so they speak louder, or they expect things. And I think if you have the mindset of going in and you're learning from the cultures and you're exposing yourself to new things, you're more likely to be in a dialogue like what we're having now, a reasoned dialogue discussion. And you don't take it personally. You want to learn new things. You want to hear what the other side has to say in a discussion, because that's how you learn and grow. I think the biggest problem, and this is one of the things I'd love for us to delve into, and we've hit around it a lot today, but today you've got an environment, I think, brought on even more so by social media, where we have these bubbles, and you're stuck in a bubble, and it goes back to this ancestral need for you're in a group, and that offers you some level of protection. So you conform to the group, you dress like the group, you think like the group, so that you're safer in numbers. And I think we're getting back to some of that, and people really feel a need to conform with a bubble or a small group around them. And if you don't, it's almost like they want to throw you out of the group. So you're then you're excluded from the group because you're called a name for being an independent thinker, and you're kind of shoved out of that. But then you don't really fit in another group out there because it's a different way of thinking too. And so there was a book out there where they were talking about this idea of travelers, and you're traveling between different camps or places, and you're exposed, and it's what explorers would do back in the day. And I think that's kind of my feeling of a maverick mindset or an explorer mindset of you're not just tethered to one mindset or community, you're wanting to explore others. And I think that's why I feel very comfortable, with Deshawn as I used to call him my mentee. Now he's probably going to become my mentor as I lose my faculties over time. But he always exposes me to lots of new thoughts and ways of thinking. And actually, Deshawn had mentioned Mo Green. His son, Isaiah Green, was on the board of governors with me for a year as a student government association. He's the one that introduced me to Clubhouse. And that, there's just, I think people that want to learn more about other ideas, other concepts, other cultures do that. And people that don't kind of stay in there. But I think there's a lot of pressure right now to stay in your group for fear of being labeled as an outsider. And, I find that all the time where, I'll do something that pisses off Democrats out there. And then I do something that pisses off Republicans on the other side. And I'm kind of in the middle. I'm like, I'm not going to conform with 100% of what someone thinks over here, or 100% of what somebody else thinks. I'm more independent thinking. And that's kind of this concept of Mavericks with Marty is that independent thinkers.
I love the name. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And I think, you're right, Marty. I was doing, being a Republican, I was a poll watcher for the last election. And I wanted to be at A&T. I figured, man, I'm going to go. I'm Republican. I'm going to go. Well, I get in there and there's two black ladies. There's a whole bunch of blacks. I always think I was the only white until the Democrat came in, and it was a white guy. And he was a German professor at Guilford College. And we started talking and got to know each other. And well, it turns out two of the ladies that worked there that were running it were scouters. They recognized her for scouting. Hey, Bill, what are you doing here? And I had a mail-in ballot on me that I had to put in because I was going to be out of town. So I gave it to her, and she walked me through the process and the procedure, which I was kind of curious of because everybody said the mail-in ballots were bogus. And
I can't wait to comment. Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
Hilarious.
Go ahead.
So I'm sitting there, and we had a break, and so I asked the Democrat. I said, "Hey, let's go outside. They have the statue of the four kids that went to this Civil Rights Museum or to Woolworths and sat down. I said, let's take our picture." So we took our picture, and then we took a couple other pictures, and I posted them on Facebook. And I said I had a great time doing this. Showed all the pictures. I said everything looked good. I even met a couple nice Democrats. And holy cow, it blew up.
Well, go ahead, Bill. I have to comment, but I want to make sure you finish first.
So I'll give one more thing, and then you go. So these people were really coming. You know what it's like, Marty, in social media. They start at you, and so I always ask them. I say, let's go have a cup of coffee. Let's go. And one guy goes, no, I won't have coffee. I'll have dinner with you. I said, okay. He says, and I want steak. And I said, you pick the place, I'll buy. And he said, I want to go to Fleming's. I said, you got it. And he never showed. And so, Odell, your turn.
Bill, they said, listen, you a poll watcher. Here you are, 70-something-year-old white male Republican. You're supposed to go over to A&T and watch those black folk to make sure they ain't cheating. Because you came in there mail-in voter. The then president told everybody, hey, they're cheating. And you were supposed to go over there and catch them cheating. And you going over there making friends with the enemy. Well, it's crazy. And let me tell you what exactly. Let me tell you what even is a little bit more bizarre. You have Senator Raphael Warnock. Heard him preach. He's at Ebenezer Baptist Church
in
Atlanta.
I walked in his church.
Yes, we were there together, right?
Yeah.
Heard him preach even before. And of course, he's a Morehouse man. So now I think, and Deshawn helped me, but is Herschel Walker running against him, or is that not the case down in Atlanta? And if that's the case, then what a paradox for the good people in Atlanta, since Herschel lives in Dallas, Texas, I believe, and he's coming back to run in Atlanta or run for the state of Georgia. And to Marty's point, social media gives everybody so much courage behind that keyboard to say this and do that and just just say stuff that I guess they would never say face to face, because what I do know, Marty, it's hard to hate up close. You know, you could say anything and do anything, and you could be a social media hero or all that kind of good stuff. So, Sean, is the whole Warnock Walker situation in Atlanta, or since I don't live there, am I missing the mark, sir?
Yeah. No, you're right. It's they're running for a U.S. Senate seat, so it is statewide. But you're right, Herschel Walker. I believe Raphael Warnock is from Savannah, Georgia. But yeah, they're two Georgia candidates. But yes, definitely true. It's it does present an option, obviously, in this case, to vote for two black people, either Warnock, who's a Democrat, or Herschel Walker, who's a Republican. And it is, you know, obviously a lot of debate around, you know, what does progress look like? Who, you know, if not race being the challenge, what then is going to make, you know, the next step for the state? So yeah, it's definitely a toss up right now.
You know, speaking of Georgia, it's one of the big bones I have to pick with former President Trump. I feel like he went down to Georgia and just created such a mess with this election fraud concept. First of all, you know, it's just, I think he kept Republicans from showing up to vote because he went down and told everybody, your vote doesn't count. It's all rigged. And I feel like he kind of wanted to take his ball and go home. And if he couldn't win, he didn't want the Senate in Republican hands. It felt intentionally disingenuous the way he was approaching that, or wanted to say he really deserved the presidency. And what he did on when he was giving the speech on January 6th, when he called out Mike Pence and asked him to effectively break the law. I tweeted right after that, before the Capitol was stormed, and said, this guy's a nut job and he needs to be stopped. I mean, he's destroying the Republican Party. You can't have a party of one there where he is just attacking everybody else. So I think he's brought in this concept of voter fraud out there, and which the other side of that coin is people may not show up to vote if they don't have confidence in the system. So I don't think he's really helping with that concept. And then secondly, asking elected officials to break the law because he wants to stay in power. That's one step away from a coup. And my comments on that have gotten me, you know, criticism from fellow Republicans, but you know, you can't be silent on these things. You have to be willing to speak out. Now, at the same time, I'm sitting here going, okay, do I want Joe Biden or former President Trump on some of these decisions?
Yeah.
I'm a little conflicted about that. I wish I had a third option out there. And that's part of, we need better people to run. I've told Deshawn one day he's gonna have to run.
Vote for Deshawn. Vote for Deshawn. Okay.
Yeah, Deshawn, you got my vote. You got my vote. We just won't go back and look at your juvenile record. That's all.
Actually, I'm surprised, Odell, that have you run before for office?
No, I never ran for office before. I am a political analyst. People pay me for my political strategy. I fundraise for individuals, but I've been asked to run for U.S. Congress. I've been asked to run for a bunch of other things, but I've never ran for office.
And Bill, I think you have ran.
I was going to.
Right?
I was going to run for Congress and then even mayor. And then I thought more of it. And I said, you know, I've got a lot on my plate. And my wife actually was the one that we were sitting in the yard having a glass of wine. And she says, let's just go through a few things here. She says, first off, I'm going to support you, whatever you do. But I need to as wives can do, point out a few things. And she says, okay, you just signed up for 4 more years, pretty high level with scouting. You started another business. You got your current business. You've got a nonprofit you're going. It sounds like Marty Kotis, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like Marty.
And she says, and where are you going to find time to either be a mayor or a congressperson? What are you going to give up? And, you know, she put some common sense in that I sat back and said, I come from a political family. My grandfather was in politics for 27 years. I worked on the House for a congressman, lived with him. So I've got it in my blood. There's no doubt about it. So maybe sometime in the future, she may run, and that maybe I can enjoy it through that avenue. And
I think all three of y'all should run, and I'll help in your campaigns because you would all do really well.
Well, Marty, what if all three of us think you should run? So then what are you to say about that?
Yeah.
Well, when the Emperor of North Carolina opens up, I'll run for that position. But so long as I have to make decisions with a lot of other people.
Right.
I don't know. The Board of Governors, there were a lot of 31-1 votes. And
yeah. Well, Marty, my impression of Marty is an independent thinker, which I love. And as I get to know Marty more and more, the relationship gets richer. But one thing that definitely I understand about Marty, it's not that he doesn't play nice with others. He just likes his own sandbox. And he doesn't want somebody messing in it because he knows what he's doing and he's been successful at it. So why change the formula?
I think I'm not afraid to speak up on certain issues. I'm not afraid to challenge others. And I think sometimes, that can hurt other people's feelings. And and I'm not afraid to hurt other people's feelings when I'm discussing something, just because, you can't just be so polite that you never talk about things. There was a quote, Tom Fetzer, that served on the Board of Governors with me, had I want to say it was a Thatcher quote, that it was, the concept of it was, when you reach an agreement, you've basically watered everything down to where, you're not sticking to your principles. And I don't think that that's exactly true, but I do think a spirited debate that then results in a final decision is better than not covering all the issues, because you can leave things out. And so, I think you come to a better decision when you have that spirited debate out there.
Agree.
And that's one of the reasons I don't surround myself with yes people. Now, at the end of the day, I'm going to make the call, but I want their feedback along the way.
You think about it, this podcast reminds me of John McCain, Senator John McCain, where he stood on the Senate floor and Mitch McConnell said, okay, then President Trump wants to not overturn the Obamacare bill. Everything was in place. And I guess McCain may have said, the original Maverick, said, no, I'm not going to vote. And I guess McConnell, who is brilliant, not that I agree with everything, but when it comes to a politician, Mitch McConnell is one of the best out there. He says, okay, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it in my face. And John McCain, suffering from the illness he was dealing with, stood up, walked there, and turned it thumbs down. Now, I know that unraveled a lot of things, especially what the former president was trying to do, because I think he had an ought against President Obama. But that's a maverick. That's a maverick. But John McCain was always like that, though. He was always like that. He believed in what he believed in, and whatever hits he took, that's fine. But, that's the true sign of a maverick. And when he went thumbs down, it's like, wow. How much easier, Marty, how much easier, Bill, how much easier Deshawn, how much easier, Odell, it would have been if he would have just said, let me just go along with the pack. Let me just go along to get along. But, Marty, what did you think when you saw that with John McCain?
Well, we're not going to find common ground on Obamacare, I don't think.
I got you. I got you. And that's the good thing about the show.
but for a lot of reasons out there. But, I'm a business guy, and you look at how things are handled. I think the whole healthcare system needs significant reform.
Amen.
Out there. I mean, it's so many levels. And the one positive thing I'll say about Obamacare, because you want to say something nice about something, even if you hate the rest of it.
Right.
Is there was an effort in there to get rid of all the paperwork. You think about when you go to the doctor, how many times do you have to fill out these damn forms all the time? And so there was an effort to make the systems talk to each other more. And that's significant. Telecare is another one that coming out of COVID recently, I think is a great solution as well. But I would like to see technology used to impact healthcare more, rather than just kind of, okay, we're going to open up the floodgates and then flood the system. You've also got to start having some strategic decisions about what do you really do and the cost for certain things. and is that serving people the most? So those are kind of where I come at in pre-existing conditions. So I come at Obamacare dislike from a few things in there, but I'm all for reform of the system.
Gotcha.
But I do, what I've seen is independent thinkers in the Republican Party over the last couple of years have just been beat down by President Trump. I mean, he's a bully that's won every fight. I mean, he's cowed his opponents because because the crowd loves the Roman Colosseum. They love that kind of a fight, reality TV, etc. And he's catching. I mean, he's like and he's been on WWE. He's using that WWE or the Apprentice mindset to say, hey, you're fired, or do a SmackDown here, meet the people's elbow, type deal. And so, that's what I don't like about what he's done. Now, people will say he's rallied a lot of voters out there. I'm not a fan of that whole approach of the system. I do like more of the cutting through the DC speak, where people are speaking more their mind. But I don't like all the hyperbole and rhetoric out there where it's more trash talking.
Well, you mentioned a bully. A lot of times, bullies don't have to always fight. Just when the bully shows up and stick his hands out and says, "Give me your lunch money," then you give them their lunch money. I think President Putin can take on some of those attributes when he went into Ukraine. And all of a sudden, it's like, we're coming in and we're going to take your country. And the good people of Ukraine said, "No, you're not." He said, "Well, but don't you understand? If you don't, I'm going to beat you down and I'm going to kill you." Well, let's have it. So sometimes standing up to the bully makes all the difference in the world. And when you look at Congressman Adam Kinzinger, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name, I've always liked him and others in the Republican Party because what people don't understand, and Deshawn, you could help me here because you're the other black guy on the call, a lot of times black Democrats are some of the most conservative people you've ever met. We're very conservative. We're very conservative. And people are like, oh my God. But at the same time, I voted and supported Republicans who have a lot of the same mindsets that I have. But unlike many people, when it gets down to the bully coming up and saying, "Give me your lunch money," I can't give you my lunch money because I'm hungry. And it's a movie. You probably, I don't know, you might have looked at it, called Fridays before. Sean, you've seen Fridays before, right?
Definitely seen Friday. Or else my black card would be gone.
Exactly. And we don't want your black card to be gone. But hey, by the way, Marty has a black card and Bill has a black card too. So we've seen the movie Friday, and Friday has this big bully who he's a bully over everybody. And the last scene of the movie, the kid who was so afraid of the bully stood up to the bully and fought. And he got beat, but in the end, he beat the bully sometimes. And I think that's the thing with Russia right now. You have to stand up to the bully because the bully don't stop. He'll take my lunch money today and he'll wait a while. Then he'll take your lunch money, Marty. He'll wait around. He'll take your lunch money, Bill. And then when he tried to take LaShawn's lunch money, that's when the fight starts. And the bully don't want to fight.
I think that's the one time these days that I find myself going a little bit more personal is if I see someone out there and they are acting the bully, then I feel that it's appropriate to call them out and hit back just because, especially if they do it to somebody that I know or care about, it bothers me more than maybe even if they do it to me. They do it to me, I might turn the cheek a few times, but they do it to somebody else, I think I get a little bit more riled up right away.
Yeah. What gets under my skin is they call you a rhino. And,
a what, Bill?
A rhino, Republican in name only.
Wow.
And that's just not right. And that's just being a bully. And I want to reverse that. Remember the Rat Pack? That was, Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. I mean, they were popular. If they showed up in Vegas, they sold out Vegas. Well, I want to start a Rat Pack for Republican parties. Republicans against Trump.
Wow.
We're the rats.
Wow, come on, Bill. You know you're gonna get kicked out of the white Republican club, and then you have to come over here with the conservative Democrats.
Well,
you got to come hang out with the black folks.
You just said I got a black card, so I don't need
no But you see real strong Republican leaders like Mark Walker running for Senate.
Amen.
Who, I think what I really appreciate about him is he embraces his faith. He's unafraid. And that's a whole other battle out there, is this attack on people having any sort of faith out there. It's like, if you're not an atheist, you're considered crazy by some groups out there. And I appreciate that he embraces his faith. I appreciate that he's a moral person out there. I agree with a lot of the things and his thinking. I don't agree with 100% of it, but I agree with a lot of it out there. But his character is more solid in my mind. And I also, I met Mark because I was supporting Phil Berger Jr. in his run for Congress, and the Bergers, by the way, I love. There are people out there that don't love them. I think them. They're great principled people as well. And people will disagree on issues out there and topics. And again, you're never going to agree with a politician 100% on items. You will agree with them on certain things and maybe disagree on others, unless it's yourself running. And so when Phil Jr. was running, Mark Walker approached me and said, if you, if I make it through the primary, would you support me? And I said, yes, I'll support you if you make it through the primary. And I thought at that time there was like no chance at all that he would make it through the primary because Phil was super strong. But when he did, and it was a big shock, I kind of got over the shock after a couple of weeks, and he called me and I agreed to support him. And that's why I think right now people may be underestimating him in his run for Senate, because you can't count him out in his ground game. He reaches a lot of people. He doesn't have the war chest. He doesn't have, big money funding him. He doesn't have the name brand out there that Governor McCrory has. But he knows how to work a ground game, and people care about him. And I think that's, going back to something you said earlier, Odell, when you've got people out there from differing groups, why do you do that? Because I think you feel that someone genuinely cares about you. They're not just, you don't make close friends with someone you think is using you or that they're not genuine. And so I think, he connects with a lot of people, and they feel like he really cares about them, and he cares about a lot of different communities out there too. He's been very active in the HBCUs and has done a lot to support HBCUs in the state.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, one thing to just posit into the conversation too. I know y'all have, in the last couple of minutes, especially, we talked about the political landscape. I've been mostly observing and listening to you all, but I think I'm gonna say aloud, right, what is going through my mind as a person who is a millennial, right? That also is probably let's just say I don't think any of y'all are under the age of 40. I am, and we'll say, like, as a millennial, right, I think part of where I am currently struggling, especially in this political landscape, is a lot of what the concept of even the podcast, like the whole independent thinker, maverick, etc. As a person who has, again, friends, navigating both Democratic and Republican, issues. I've been, in a lot of roles even up until this point as a consultant at, a firm called North Highland. I've worked at Deloitte. I've been in several different sectors as a professional, on the healthcare side, working for one of the largest states on their, Medicaid programs, and thinking about expansion and thinking about peeling that back. And, even now in my current role at one of the largest technology companies in the world, I'm at Goebel, and we are grappling with how do we navigate as a society and as a business these different, really this complex landscape around policy. And what I'm trying to articulate is I find myself as trying to be an independent thinker, as trying to think about what are the, values that, mean the most to me, and how do we collectively create this world that we're all trying to achieve. I think what I'm saying is I am definitely, and I think a lot of my friends are, struggling with where is our voice represented in the current political landscape, right? When we hear, obviously the conflicts that has happened over the last couple of years with President Trump, obviously things that have happened on January 6th, and, Obama, we've lived with him now, and we've seen, obviously the pros and cons and challenges that he dealt with, certainly the ones that President Biden deals with, and even the ones that, President Donald Trump dealt with. And so I guess, y'all, what I'm trying to say is, how do we navigate, right? I kind of see you all as, being around the block a few times. And certainly y'all have perspective around, what you personally believe and think around, Democrat Party or Republican Party. I guess my question to you all is, how do we get to a place where people like the ones y'all just mentioned, Senator or, Representative Walker and others, where they can hear the voice of the generation that's coming up behind them to really say, hey, how do we mature as America? And I think that's what I've seen, personally, this just utter immaturity in our democracy. You look at the rhetoric around Donald Trump and his supporters. You look at the people, in some cases, the rhetoric around people who are Obama or nothing else, right? And I'm like, isn't it much more complex than that?
Yes.
And how do we build a society that not is just reflective in terms of race and demographic and all that, but build a society where we can get closer to our truest values as America? And I'm not saying we need to build a utopia. That won't exist. But how do we edge more towards a more mature democracy? And I think I don't know where that's happening in a lot of these public debates and conversations. And so as an independent thinker, my mindset is, what role do I play, right? I'm in the business setting. I've been a consultant. I've been in large companies. I've worked at UPS as an example. So I've been in a lot of different spaces, and I'm just like, what will we mature to become? Is my question to you all. Do y'all,
I
the
think,
conversations
Deshawn,
y'all are having?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got some real opportunity in Georgia right now. I think that, again, not to sit here and just tell you to vote Republican, but I do think, well, I think you might ought to consider it, only because, the Republican Party is welcoming a lot of different viewpoints. And to the extent you can have,
I won't vote exclusively Republican Party. I'm with you. I believe all of us.
And I think
what's most true.
If you see people coming into the party that you think are more moderate or might represent different values, I think it is a chance to mold the party from within. I think the Republican Party needs some change, and it needs some more diverse voices in leadership positions to affect that change. But I think there's some opportunities out there for that to happen. And again, I wouldn't say, vote a straight party ticket, but look at the different candidates individually out there. And I think that's what's going to, if we start evaluating candidates, both D's and R's, and saying, okay, what's the person's character like? What are they, and how will they work within that organization? I think there's some opportunity out there. So.
Right. And Deshawn, this is Odell, the good-looking black guy, of course. My premise, what I would say to you as a millennial leader, or a leader who happens to be a millennial, is from the premise that the Democratic Party takes the black vote for granted and the Republican Party ignores the black vote. Therefore, the black vote is caught between a political rock and a hard place. Now, understanding that, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, let me call these candidates to a forum that I, meaning you, organize for millennials and let them know these are our concerns. and get their responses for those concerns. I think that's the best place to start, because one thing a good politician will do, he or she will come and listen to you. And if you never talk to them, they don't know. But at the same time, letting people know that you are open for understanding, because you're not questioning them like they're on the witness stand. You're questioning them for a better understanding. And that's how I can, as a lifelong Democrat who's proud of it, is the fact that that's how I got a better understanding of how this person thinks. Because just because someone is a black Democrat or a white Republican or a white Democrat or a black Republican, that doesn't matter. You want to know how they're thinking. Will they represent what you want done? And understanding that is not going to be all or nothing. Case in point, then I'll be quiet. When Mark Walker was a candidate to run for Congress, I endorsed him. And the newspapers, the media went crazy. I cannot believe, Odell, someone in a very powerful, influential position like you are a lifelong black Democrat, and you endorse a white Republican Baptist preacher. What's the common ground there? Well, a lot of times what me and Mark talked about is HBCUs. Why will HBCUs only get Pell Grant? In those days, we call it Pell Grant at the beginning of the semesters. Mark, how can we go in there and change it so now you could even get Pell Grant around summer school? Why is the whole thing on Pell Grant funding, it has to be keep voted on? And Mark took it and helped push it along with Congresswoman Alma Adams so that it could be permanent funding. All those type of things. And a lot of folks who graduated from HBCUs don't even know all that happened. But at the same time, when you look at, what's the gentleman's name? He's in the White House administration now, but he used to be over the Black Congressional Caucus. Oh man, what's his name? Is a brother from Louisiana Tech or something like that. But him and Mark worked together to get a whole lot of things on the Second Chance Act passed. So yes, if you look at Mark's voting record, say Mark's a Republican congressman, it's a lot of things on there I don't agree with. However, I got enough things that I agree with to make the relationship more than a transactional relationship. And I think that's kind of how you look at it, because if it's not a zero-sum game, it's not all or nothing. You want to say, okay, this is important to us. HBCU permanent funding, that's important to us, because I used to have the young guys up and down the hall where I work about your age. They would want to argue about, is it North Carolina A&T versus Central University? And I would tell them, no, stop. As the elder statesman or the old guy on the hall, whatever they choose to call me, I'm like, guys, I don't need you arguing over A&T and Central. I need you both understanding that legislation that affects HBCUs affects everybody. Cedric Richmond is the gentleman who was over the Congressional Black Caucus, and Mark was also over the study, also a Morehouse man. Ain't nothing like the Morehouse man. And, Mark was over the very large, I forgot the name of the committee in Congress. So you have to understand how committees work, how politics work. So if you have Cedric Richmond, who's over the Congressional Black Caucus, and you have Congressman Mark Walker, who's over the study commission, conservative study commission, and they're working together to get enough votes, because if you don't have enough votes, you can't pass legislation. To get enough votes so HBCU could be funded year round, or get enough votes because this and that, because that the truth of the matter, if some people had their way, it wouldn't be HBCUs. You and I both know that. And HBCUs cannot survive just on the alumni supporting it, because the alumni don't give enough back. I don't know about Morehouse, but others don't give enough back to support it. So I think that's part of it. So to your question, you organize, you get a lot of millenniums together, and then you invite the senators, the congressmen, or the local individuals who are running. You come here and you are the moderator. You're the moderator to say, we have some questions and we need some answers from your perspective. And it's not a ambush. Don't ambush people. Just bring them in and say, hey, how do you feel about this? Or how do you feel about that? And make sure that it's done and it's ran by millennials. And you are the man for the job to be the moderator. But if you're going to be the moderator, you have to be a fair and honest broker. You have to be fair and you have to be honest. So that's the advice that the old good-looking black guy will give to you.
I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Now, Bill's got some bad advice.
Well,
yeah,
there's, as you were talking about how do millennials impact our political landscape, I think it's a great question, quite frankly, because, you wonder, okay, how do we do this? It's a huge, 435 members in the House and then 100 in the Senate. I mean, how do you communicate with them? How do you get your views across? And I think if I'm one of not reinventing the wheel if I don't have to. If somebody's done a good job, I'd like to start with that and then maybe improve on it. So I got invited just before COVID to go to D.C. with Aipac, and it stands for American Israeli. It's not political action; it's policy action. And I didn't know what it was about. And if you have a chance to go to one of their conferences, I would go, because what they do is they have a 3 or 4 day session with breakout sessions on various topics related to Israel and the American relationship, and they teach their people how to communicate to government officials, not only national but on local level as well. And so they're doing education, and then at the end of the day, they all get together and they have a committee from local, like we have here is Ron Milstein and Victoria Milstein and the Jewish Federation. And they go and visit their congressional leaders. They break out, I went and saw Mark Walker and Ted Budd, and some people went and saw the senators. And they lobby for three simple things. Keep the budget the way it's at. And the budget's made up of support for the Iron Dome, for humanitarian aid, for technology. And there's just three buckets. And they don't go in a lot of detail, but they show up, and then 12 to 13 people. I remember we went to Mark's office, and I don't know if you've been in congressman offices. They go up, they get a little bigger office. He was in medium size. Ted Budd was still in the small size. And so we met in his office, and, there were 3 or 4 people that were allowed to talk, that were chosen to talk, I should say. And they had one topic they were supposed to talk about. And I was able to talk about the Iron Dome with Mark. And I was probably the only Gentile there. In fact, I think Rabbi Gutman was a little shocked that I was lobbying for the Jews. And but my point of telling you that real long story is, if you get a chance, see what they do. Go on one of the trips, and you'll see, okay, what you did with the kids here locally, I think you have the ability to do it for the millennials.
Good point.
I really do.
Yeah.
Great point.
Definitely appreciate the perspective. And I want to tell y'all, definitely, I was asking that question sort of tongue in cheek, to say that, again, a lot of what I'm hearing from the seat that I sit in is just like this distrust in the government overall, and a lot of folks grappling with sort of, what place do I truly have? And I appreciate the points that y'all brought up. Yeah, I definitely think I could do a little bit more, but I also would say I have a lot of friends who are on a lot of different youth campaigns. I'm thinking about like not Black Lives Matter. Sorry, don't start the debate there, Marty.
We'll go down a bunny trail on that one.
Matter. Yep. Black Voters Matter, the Defend Freedom Fund, lots of different organizations full of young civil rights activists. And I do, to your point, Bill, like I look to people like, I'm thinking about John Lewis, who I did, was really fortunate enough to go to his office right there in D.C. and to just think about his perspective, right? He started out as a teenager and young adult, and the change that he made, right? And now we look at him, on this side of his life, thinking and reflecting about just the impact he was able to make as a teenager. So I'm not saying, I relinquish my power and what I can do, but what I am saying is it's just, what I believe we're fighting for is, yes, our democracy, but also a better future for all of us. And so I personally am one of those people like, man, how do I play within the seat that I sit in and be effective in my space and in my lane? And how do I build coalitions of people who are doing this work well, with people like my friends in the Black Voters Matter or Defense Fund, etc. So I appreciate the perspective, y'all. And I'm saying, man, sometimes in my mind that gets lost in a lot of the debate and the rhetoric.
Hey, Deshawn, guess what, man? As a black man from the projects, in South Carolina, during the break, I went in to use the restroom, right? So I, rushing in there real fast, and the bathroom's closed. It's dark. So I open the door and I see all these, the toilets, man, like a cockpit, lights and stuff on the toilet. Yeah. Exactly. And I'm sitting there saying, okay, now I never had a toilet with lights, camera, and actions on it. So what's going on here? So I look at it and it's called Tutu Washlet. Just for the black folk out there listening to the podcast, TOTO, one word, Washlet, WASHLIT. And I'm like, okay, now, I don't understand. So what I did is what I always did. I lift up the seat and I pee. So that's what I do. I lift up the seat and I pee. Coming from South Carolina, we had outhouses. The outhouses didn't have all this fancy, snancy stuff. So we're going to ask our bougie friend, Marty, what's that all about? Yeah, but, and sometimes I use that as an example, as a misunderstanding or not really knowing. A lot of times white folks looked at Black Lives Matter that I'm proud of as a 61-year-old black male and say, what was that all about, Odell? I didn't understand Black Lives Matter. Just like Odell didn't understand the Toto toilet seat, but I'm going to ask Marty to explain the toilet seat to me and where in the world he get that idea. And then we're going to ask Marty, Bill, and whomever else, because we want to answer the questions for Marty listeners on the podcast. What was Black Lives Matter all about? Because a lot of white folks looked at Black Lives Matter in such a way, and then we got Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matters, and a lot of times the narrative got taken away. So, Marty, what's you doing with these bougie toilet seats? What's that all about?
Well, wait, before he does that, before we keep talking on toilets, I have a toilet seat thing out because I went before you.
Okay.
So I was shocked as well.
Oh, wait a minute now, Bill. You're a white guy, so you saw the tutu boo-boo toilet seat.
Let me tell you, that was fancy schmancy. I'm the oldest of 8. We had 10 people that lived in our house. It was 1,200 square feet. We had one bathroom. So 6 boys. So you didn't get long in the bathroom. There was a tree outside. If it was wet, that's where you went. Now we didn't call it the toilet.
There you go. That was the tree.
So the Toto Washlet idea came from a trip that I took with my wife and son to Japan. And in Japan, all the toilets are like that. Yep. And the idea is they use less toilet paper that way. They're very frugal with that. And it's better for the environment. And so it has not only a heated seat, but it's got 2 different sprayers on there, depending upon where you want to spray when you're sitting down. So it's like a combo toilet bidet. Okay. So when
that's funny.
What's really funny is when COVID was hitting and everybody was worried about running out of toilet paper, I'm like, nah, we're good. We got we don't need it.
So, Marty, how's it pronounced? I said Tutu, T-O-T-O, Washlet, but I'm a Geechee from South Carolina.
I call it Toto.
Toto.
Like
like the dog.
Like we're not in Kansas anymore.
Okay, so Toto.
Washlet.
Washlet. Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's a bidet.
Say that again, Deshawn.
No, I was just going to say, by definition, that is literally a kick-ass concept.
Exactly, yeah.
There you go. You got it. You hit it.
So it's got the heated seat. I think the heated seat is everybody's favorite part. Makes you want to, you're like, ooh, this is really nice. And then it's got the water spray that's warm water spray. And then it's got a dryer as well. And the other part of it is it's got an air filter in there. So it's filtering the air, too.
Listen, I got a question. Where do you get one of those? Because Odell's birthday's coming up.
You can get them at Home Depot.
I want to get him one.
You know what?
Can you get them at a Home Depot?
Yeah, saw you.
Oh, my gosh. What size? Do they come in sizes?
Yeah. That is so funny.
They've got different shapes on there and sizes.
What size you think we need, Odell?
The size for the big butt, good-looking black guy. Man, they'd throw me out the hood, Deshawn. If I go back there talking about my white folk and all the hanging around white folk, my white friend gave my white folks gave me a toilet seat that blow dries and heats up and wash my butt. Man, come on, I'll lose my black card if I go that route, man.
Just tell them you're doing Eddie Murphy from Coming to America.
There you go.
Yeah.
Talking about the royal.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't you have a private bathroom in your office?
I ain't got nothing.
Zion?
I ain't got private nothing, man. I'm going to leave this alone because, Deshawn, I'm going to get in trouble. Deshawn, help us from a millennial perspective on what Black Lives Matters was all about. Because just like that toilet seat, I was afraid to push buttons, so I just lifted the thing up and peed, man. I did what I know to do, and a lot of times to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And to a lot of white folks and older Black people and others, Black Lives Matter look like something that we've seen before, but we've never seen it before. From a millennial's perspective, help us in the audience understand what it was, and then we'll talk about it, debate it, because I'm sure we all don't agree. But the great thing about this show that I love about being independent thinkers and a maverick, we get to voice our difference of opinions.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, wow, that's heavy already. Like, we're about to dive into a heavy conversation. But before I get in, I mean, honestly, I want to give a disclaimer that I don't represent any organization. Like, I have my own thoughts about what it is to your question, Odell. But can kind of start with the fact of what the organization is. So I will say it started out as an organization founded, I want to say in 2013, which was, really a response to the verdict in the Trayvon Martin case, right? So, obviously, I believe George Zimmerman, not even believe, I know for a fact, George Zimmerman was acquitted. And so what that signified, I think, to Black people was, man, how is it possible that we've gone from such, from civil rights movement to at that point in 2013, but yet the same system, potentially perpetuates this trope of, what does true justice and true equity mean for the Black community? So I think as a response to that, it was founded in St. Louis by a group of women, the organization, I would say, in 2013 in response, which was really, meant to think about and ask questions to the community in St. Louis about, what does police reform potentially look like? What does what circumstances essentially led to that acquittal? Now, fast forwarding now, as we look at, the incident with George Floyd, where we had an officer, with his knee on George Floyd's neck and sort of the response there. The reason I'm trying to, explicitly state those two things is because Black Lives Matter as an organization was founded in 2013 in response to Trayvon Martin's murder, which is what I think now has been sort of dovetailed into this name, Everything's Black Lives Matter. And everything on the paper, everything that you see, related to, Black voting rights or related to systemic injustice, like all of it together, I think people now call it all Black Lives Matter. And I do think that's an important distinction to make because, in 2020, right, when the George Floyd incident happened, yes, that particular organization was definitely a part of the conversation, but it was really a lot of organizations, a lot of different people, a lot of, activists coming together to say, as a statement, Black Lives Matter. And so I think a lot of times, to be honest, both white and Black folks don't really understand that distinction. I think in terms of what happened as a result of George Floyd, I mean, man, that was by true definition the largest movement that happened, regardless of your political affiliations and beliefs and, feelings that you have towards it. It was definitely the largest movement since the civil rights era. I think, personally, one thing that's difficult for people to digest is what are they actually trying to accomplish as a group and, as a movement, I would say. Forget about the group, really as a movement. What are we trying to accomplish? And I think that's where there's a lot of different debate around, well, what is it? Why do we see, Black people destroying communities? Why is there, a response for Blue Lives Matter afterwards? Why are we, indicting all officers? I think that's really people's lack of being able to grapple with, hey, there's a lot of different issues that are wrapped up into this statement, Black Lives Matter. So I think we definitely in this conversation need to unpack what are those different things. But I think that's what it is.
And I think that's a good point.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, because one of the things that I've always been against the whole idea of defunding the police. I think that's one of the most ridiculous ideas that I've ever heard. But again, that's just one guy's opinion. I look at it like this, and I'm so interested to get Marty's and Bill's perspective. But I look at it like this. When I was young, we used to play this game called South Carolina called Red Light, Green Light. And it was one of those little games that, you know, you had a person being it and you had to turn around, stop and go or freeze. Then later on, I got to the point where I started getting my permit. In South Carolina in the early 70s, you could get a permit at 16. So we started driving, and it was something called a stoplight. White people call it traffic lights. And it had a red mean stop, a green mean go, and a yellow mean wait. So I understood those rules. And then later on, me and Bill was traveling to Paris, France, and it's something called the Arc de Triomphe. And it's really what we call a roundabout. I think it's like 12 to 18 different entrances and exits at the same time in a different language, so you didn't understand it. And it was no stoplights. It wasn't a green light, a yellow light, or a red light. So all these people coming on at one time. And I think that's where race relations and the whole thing with Black Lives Matters and so many other things are in that roundabout, and you don't know what to do. You don't know what to do because you can't go in there and freeze because someone's honking at you, blowing at you. If you say the wrong thing, you're stepping on eggshells, someone's there. So it's so much going on there. So when we come from our different places and we don't understand it, and usually we attack what we don't understand. So I would love to get my good friend, Marty. Bill, who's going to jump in there, my friend?
I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Marty.
I won't use the Kid Rock quote from the We the People song, but, you know, of course, Black Lives Matter, you know, and I don't feel the need to add any sort of additional stance on that about other lives or anything else. Black lives do matter, and police brutality is bad. I mean, no one wants police brutality out there at all. So if those, I'm a practical guy, if those are the problems, if the issue is, police discrimination or brutality, let's address that kind of head on. I think the problem is it starts to get confusing when you throw a lot of other things in there and you throw in solutions that aren't really solutions. So when you say, when you start vilifying all police, you know, that's the same thing. That's just lumping people into one big category. Vilify the police that are committing the crimes and the brutality, but don't take a police officer who is a good person. And full disclosure, my cousin is a campus police officer over at Duke. I have another cousin that was a drug enforcement person over in High Point. And, you know, they go out there every day and risk their lives to make sure everybody else is safe. And I know they're good people. And I generally have the glass half full approach on this. So I believe that most police out there are trying to do a great job. It is a very, I mean, I don't think any of us here would want to go out, put ourselves at risk of being shot every day. And no one wants to go out and wake up and go write a traffic ticket or, you know, or go into a situation where you might not come home that day. And so I feel like it was in the same way that, you know, Trump's attack on the election integrity in Georgia was counterproductive. I feel like some of the efforts were very counterproductive. The riots, I believe, were counterproductive. The defund the police, I believe, is counterproductive. Because let's play this out. Let's say you defund the police, you vilify police, you call them all sorts of names, you make it a job that no one wants. Well, then no one wants that job. And who's going to take that job? You know, a bad police officer, probably not a good police officer.
Good point.
So my feeling is you got the carrot and the stick out there. Okay. Use the stick only on the bad police, not all police, and provide a carrot to try and attract better quality. Now, when I served on the UNC System Board of Governors, we instituted education benefits, significant education benefits for police officers. We increased campus funding for police.
That's good. That's good.
All because we want to get the best police out there, because we want the best experience when our students or faculty or staff or people on the campus community are interacting with our officers. We want the best that you can have. We want the most educated. We want them to be trained. So we've got down We've got national training for them. We do state level training, and now we have additional educational benefit. So then we can recruit the best officers and keep our students, faculty, and staff safe, rather than say, let's cut the funding or make them feel bad. Or if you take away qualified immunity, for instance, you won't have anybody wanting to serve. Then you're like New Jack City. I mean, people are going to be
Marty, what you know about New Jack? Marty, what you know about New Jack City?
You know, I would like to take a black card test sometime, because I think between music and movies and Deshawn and Isaiah keeping me on fleek, which is no longer a word, but which I know is no longer a word. Yeah. And drip and all that. I mean,
well, let me ask you, Marty.
And Deshawn can testify to that as a side funny note, because we're dealing with a serious topic, of course. But when I got on Clubhouse, I got exposed to a lot of different viewpoints.
Oh my God!
But I think I made Deshawn spit out his drink one time when he saw me on Clubhouse. Deshawn, you want to tell the story?
Marty, y'all listen. Marty is on Clubhouse, which, by the way, I already think is embarrassing. I'm like, what is Marty doing on Clubhouse? You got time for this?
Well, Isaiah brought me on there. Isaiah Green.
Yeah, Marty's in a I believe that we were in Clubhouse. They have a room, right? So you go into a room, and that's the club you're in. So Marty's in a club. I don't even remember the topic, Marty, of that particular room, but there was a lot of let's just say young black girls on the call, and Marty's this like soul white dude with his icon that's like just dripping middle-aged white man.
The and room so people was like, was called something in baddies or baddies.
Something in baddies, yeah.
Yes. And I sent Deshawn a screenshot of that, and he about laughed himself silly.
So the word we use is to choose someone. We say to be chose, right? So Marty's in the room being chose, meaning people are like, yo, okay, I see you, Big Daddy Marty. Who are you? Where you from? So me and Marty have a running joke.
Wait a minute, we're stopping there. Big Daddy Marty. I think that may be the podcast name.
Now that is not actually approved, and so Marty, you'll have to deal with that.
Okay,
that's only second to my my prowess in the plow fields when we were over in Africa. And I had a lot of admirers over there too. I was like, hey, he can work like 8 hours.
You were the man.
Okay, we got to look at Marty's black card. Okay, my bad. So Marty, you're right. I stand to be correct. You like, wait a minute now, Odell. Wait a minute. But back to Black Lives Matters, Marty, to the perspective of how it was understood and misunderstood, but at the same time, your other reflections or opinions or thoughts on that before we kick it off to my partner in crime, Bill.
I think it overall, there were a lot of good things that came out of it. And I just, I'm one of these perfectionists, and I'm always looking for, okay, how can we improve something? So when I do that, it's like, okay, what can we fix out of that? I would say if you took out the riots and you took out the defund the police, there would have been a much broader collaborative support for the issue. And so I think, now I think we're in that space where that's the next approach, is just move it in that direction, have more inclusive conversations, talk about real needs and priorities. And yeah, I think the conversation's ongoing. It's something you have to talk about out there, obviously. And it's something we still need to work on, but we've got to have realistic solutions. We can't have, at Chapel Hill, for instance, when we get a proposal, sometimes the proposal is just so pie in the sky that it's not realistic. And I think sometimes if you overshoot and you ask for pie in the sky, then nothing really happens. And so I'm more of what are the next 3 things that we can do? So I'd kind of throw it back on you and Deshawn in terms of, what are 3 things that would really address Black Lives Matter?
I got it. And I'm going to get to that. But Deshawn, before we kick it to my partner, Bill, Big Daddy Marty with the Barry White voice. You know what I mean? The radio voice of Barry White, so that's why he had all the black women in the room, like Big Daddy Marty. Bill.
Dripping oil, right?
With the oil, exactly. So Big Daddy Bill.
I'm enjoying this conversation. This has been fun. Let me start out with, we took a break and we got back. Marty goes, would you like some bourbon? And I said, yeah. So we are now drinking bourbon. So you're going to see probably a different tone to this conversation. But, let me give you my take on Black Lives Matters. I had never heard of it before. This is a 72-year-old white guy perspective. So I'm up in Taylorsville, North Carolina, ATVing with my cousins from Ohio. And their sons were down in Charlotte. One's an F-18 fighter pilot and retired and just recently, and asked it to go back in Black Ops to go to Ukraine. And but anyhow, my two cousins come down from Ohio. They got Trump stickers all over their trucks, wearing Trump hats, Trump shirts. And in Taylorsville, that's pretty popular. So I'm thinking, okay, now I know the one F-18 guy he's pretty cool. And the other guy's he's more liberal, and I'm kind of in the middle. So I'm in the middle trying to figure out, okay, let's get this going. So I just thought, what do you think of Black Lives Matters?
Oh, no, you didn't, Bill. You didn't throw that red meat out there, did you?
This is after a few bourbons too, so you can imagine. So I'm listening to this, and I'm going, okay, where do I take an on-ramp to try and talk to these guys and bring them back to some reality? And I'm going to get back to that, but I want to tell you my perspective. I never heard of it until Floyd, and then it was all over the place, and it got hijacked. It got hijacked by Fox News and all those people. And, it's socialist, it's communist. You know where the money's going. If you follow the website, it does. Just some unbelievable stuff. But I'll tell you what it did for me. My lenses started to change when I saw the video of Floyd being murdered. Then when they started talking about the other murders and shootings, and then you had the one with the two Atlanta guys that finally got put away, right? And all of a sudden it started occurring to me that we're actually killing black people in this country. And whether it's a cop or not, we're killing black people for whatever reason. And so it affected me from that standpoint, that if Black Lives Matters is a vehicle to make everyone aware of that and to put a stop to it, I'm all in. But it's been hijacked like critical race theory was. Critical race theory was the same way. They hijacked it and they made it bad. If you look at critical race theory, all it is history lesson. It's a history. And if you change the name, it's like when someone says, I was in a class one time and they said white privilege. And the fellas, a couple of the fellas in there got their back up over that terminology. If we change the terminology to, I have a white advantage. I have an advantage because of where I grew up. I have an advantage because of maybe my family's economic background or political background. So I have an advantage. So take away, privilege to advantage, and people get it. So I think that all these things are really important to bring to the surface, but they get hijacked, and then people that don't dig in but make it an emotional issue, like my cousins, they will not listen to any common sense. There is nothing me bringing them over except that maybe if Jesus came back and told them that was wrong. That was about the only thing that would change them. And so, I can do a couple things in that. And Marty, it's kind of like what you were talking earlier. I can get in their face and we can no longer talk. All right. Or I can listen to them and then kind of probe and maybe break down. But here's the cool thing. It didn't go on to the next generation. Their kids did not pick that up. And it's interesting. The one guy that was there, my cousin, his dad was unbelievably anti-Semitic. I mean, if you brought up a Jewish name he just went off the rails. And, but His sons never picked that up. So it is stoppable. But we've inherited a Black Life Matters and a critical race theory that's been hijacked.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is this concept of generalizations, where people are viewing all police the same, all Black folks the same, all Jewish folks the same, and kind of labeling. And it's, they may have one experience or another, or their parent taught them something, and then they start to, it's very easy to label people. And, that creates a problem because not everybody's the same. Everybody's an individual, and you shouldn't judge someone when you come up on them based on their appearance. You should judge them based on their character and what they're doing. And I think that's where a lot of this issue comes in is, you've got police interacting with different people that they stop or they run into. And, clearly, there are some bad police out there that have done horrible things, and they need to be rooted out of the system. It's not acceptable. It doesn't matter what race the person is that they're harming. They shouldn't be doing that. And if they're doing that based on an implicit bias that they have, then that's a problem too. And you have to train them on that and train them not to react. But again, I don't want this to come off like I'm defending the police, but they are out there where their life is in jeopardy a lot of times. And, that clearly wasn't the case in the George Floyd issue or a lot of these other ones out there. But sometimes they are out there in a situation where they may be fired upon, and they've got to, when they come out and they've got their gun drawn, that's because if somebody else has their gun out, they may shoot them. Deshawn and I actually went down to a tactical defense academy range that I used to go to in Hickory, and had a chance to go through a multi-screen display where they train police and law officers to engage with the public. And we do that with the UNC police and state level police. They have that, and you have someone kind of coaching them so that they can get used to these interactions and used to how to react and how to handle things and how not to shoot the wrong person. Now, I will tell you, not to rat Deshawn out here, but they have this thing called a surefire or something like that. It's not surefire. It's something like that. But anyway, it's like a taser that goes on your hip, mild taser, but still it feels like a bee sting. And if you get shot, you get stung. The minute we hooked that up, Deshawn turned into the Terminator.
I'm good.
Killed it.
I'm good.
A little lady walking across, he was like blowing them away.
That's a terrorist, yeah.
Right.
Oh man, it's interesting. Let me make a couple questions, and I'm kicking to Deshawn. And this is going to sound weird coming from a good-looking Black guy who's drinking water, not bourbon. But from this perspective, the thing that we have to deal with, Marty, I'm going to talk about biases, prejudice, and stereotypes, but also I'm going to talk about fact. In Greensboro, North Carolina, the majority homicides here are young African-American males, those who are being killed. That's horrible. However, even more horrible than that is the trigger finger that's pulling the trigger on these guns or these weapons that's murdering them is a Black finger also. Now, let's just say we had 50, 60, 70 murders, homicides in Greensboro last year. And 95% of them were African-American males, and 95% of the perpetrators were African-American males. Now, if one police officer or law enforcement, I think that's the way people would like you to describe it, kills one African-American males, we will tear the city up, tear it down right, and everything else. I get that. What I don't get as a Black man is that how about the other 99, Odell, that are being killed by Black men, and as leaders, we don't speak out against that. That's one thing. That's one thing. And people are like, Odell, you shouldn't talk about that. You airing out dirty laundry. And I'm sitting there saying, if I'm a white guy, I know who's getting killed. I mean, we see it on the news every day, and I'm sitting there saying, you would tear up the city, Odell, if a police officer get in a confrontation with a black male, but you won't say a word if this other black men are killing black men. So, and I'm going back to Marty's thing, give me 3 things about Black Lives Matter. The fact that if Black Lives Matter, all Black Lives Matter. So we have to talk about black on black crime. The second thing is this. I live in a very affluent neighborhood, and I had the unfortunate situation years ago of my sons coming home from college and the sheriff department stopping them and making them prove that they live where they lived. And the fact that it almost went sideways, son, and I could have lost my son. My son was probably a little younger than you. And I'm like, he would have got killed for nothing, being in his own yard, the sheriff department stopping him, questioning him, what are you doing in this neighborhood? And he lives there. So the sheriff assumed something was going on, stopped them, called in backup and everything else. And we found out about it rushing from upstairs. And if he would have got killed, it would have been over nothing. Nothing was going on. And the third thing is, so having a platform, I went to, I'm part of this bougie stuff. So I went to a national NCCJ annual meeting in Greensboro, thousands of people in dinner. And I had the privilege of doing the keynote speech. So that's what I talked about. And I made so many people uncomfortable, people from the left, people from the right. And it's like black people, white people, bougie black folk, and a lot of times as black folks and white folks, when we think we're woke, whatever that means, and we get along, and then you put us in a heated, uncomfortable situation like that. And it's like, dog, Odell, we came here to have a dinner and a fundraiser and all that. And you made everybody uncomfortable. And I'm like, but we have to make people comfortably uncomfortable. So those are the things when Marty's of the world and others ask the question, not like we're on a witness stand, but he asked the question, Odell, okay, Black Lives Matter, give me 3 things. And it's almost like, well, you're a racist for asking me to give you 3 things. No, it's not. I just want to understand. I'm questioning you, not like you're on a witness stand, but questioning you for better understanding. And I love this podcast, Mavericks, because we could talk about stuff like this in a civil way where other people are like, great, I always want to ask that question. And your thoughts on that, Deshawn, on Marty's questions too, because, your thoughts, sir.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try to succinctly, because obviously brevity is not my gift. Odell knows I was born and raised in a Baptist black church with Reverend Bishop George Brooks.
My man, that's my mentor.
That's my mentor. Deshawn, we would need to do 2 hours because we had you.
Yeah, let me.
You must be Black Irish then.
Let me try to address it real quick. So I think we're talking about 2 things. One, before I even get to the 3 questions, the 3 proposed solutions. One, I think what's difficult for folks to grasp, especially as you think about Black Lives Matter as an example, is exactly the type of thing that Marty was talking about, right? I have, myself, I have, a neighbor, friends and family who are law enforcement officers as well. And what I know is it's not a matter of questioning the individual, right? It's not a matter of, are there great police officers out there? What are police officers' intent? Like, obviously, there's great police officers. Obviously, there's people who are, I myself would not sign up to take that job. But it's beyond the question of whether or not we have good people in the world. It's really a question of what are the conditions through which, an officer can, use their power in the case of George Floyd to put their, knee on him and not feel like, hey, this is not a bad thing. I can do this because I have power and control over this individual. Same case of, Trayvon Martin's case, right? Thinking about what are the conditions through which, we can know that, perhaps it's not great to, walk and stalk somebody and then shoot and kill them and you get away with it and be acquitted, right? I'm not saying that, obviously all these cases have different outcomes, but really the question is, what are the conditions that exist that allow those types of incidents to happen, right? An officer stops your son, Odell, to say, and I've been stopped myself, right? To say, like, what are you doing here? Why are you driving through this neighborhood? It's not questioning whether or not that police officer has malintent. It's really questioning, like, what gives this person that perspective that they think that they have that power over another human being. And I think that when you start to think about the conditions, you then really get to really a root understanding of, man, it's not that the people are bad, it's that our system that it exists may give way to scenarios in which Black people or others, right, feel like they are not, as humane or, equitable, etc. So I think, again, like trying to shut it all the way down, I think is bigger than whether or not there's good people and good officers. It's really of like, what are the conditions that make that system perpetuate violence on others? So I think that's one thing. I think in terms of like the whole Black on Black crime thing, like for me personally, I don't share this often, but my own brother was shot and killed in Greensboro.
Oh, wow. No, man.
And he was killed by a Black man. And I think about the conditions of his life. I had to grapple through what that meant for me as a teenager. But I think about the conditions of my brother's life. Here we have a teenager who definitely was in and out of, the juvenile justice or the criminal justice system for decisions, sure, he made. And when he got home, right, I'll just tell you real quick, he was legitimately trying to develop a better life for himself. He had 2 kids, was trying to make ends meet, was flagging cars in a temp service as an example. And like, honestly, he was making minimum wage. And in some cases, part-time work doesn't obviously equate to like what he really, truly needed. So if I think about him, and not saying he had to make the decision, right? I absolutely do not believe you have to participate in violence or participate in drug activity or anything like that. But like when I think about the conditions that say, hey, you have a felony on your back, you will never be able to get, let me say it this way, your opportunities will always be limited from that point forward, right? Because he had been out of prison. And by the way, you're not going to have enough to provide for your family because you have to work a minimum, part-time, minimum wage job. And so thinking about the conditions, I think, man, how is it even possible for me as a Black man with a formal education, go on to school, go on to make, and I don't say this to brag, but like over 6 figures, under the age of 30.
Can I borrow $20 for you, man? Marty owed me 20 and you owe me 20. So that's 40 right there. And if I can get Bill to put in 10, that's $50. I'm good.
I should not have quoted that. I'll take that back.
Wait a minute. Now I know who's buying dinner.
There you go.
But to say like, man, like how is it possible for these two realities to exist? And I think it is that I made a decision, right, that I do believe others can make, but it's not about them like making a bad decision or a right decision. It's just about like seeing what was available to you. In my case, because I did not have a criminal record, because I did not have a felony, I can make different decisions about my life and the way that I want to live it. Sure, he absolutely could have as well. But the conditions for him, to me, were different. And I think when people talk about like, what are the 2 to 3 things from a like Black Lives Matter movement? I'm like, man, his Black Lives Matter dying at the end of a bullet from a Black man as well.
Right.
And yes, I'm just as pissed off about that as I am with an officer like the one in George Floyd's incident. And for me, the parallel is, man, how do I, within the spheres that I have influence or power or privilege or opportunities, how do I examine like where I should play in my lane to, in some cases, give up a little bit of my, financial ability, give up some of like connections that I have, right? That's the whole thing that even, through Marty, I've been able to do, right? I have a connection to someone who's a business owner. I've never, tapped to Marty and say, yo, Marty, I got a business idea, help me out. But it's just that mere idea of having access and exposure really to a different path, a different way. That's not the case in a lot of different people's situations. So when I hear, what are the 2 to 3 things, it's like we're dealing with not bad actors. We're dealing with a bad structure in America by how we operate. And so I think there's 3 things that you can do in education to shore up that system. I think there's 3 things you can do from a business lens that shores up that system. Healthcare disadvantages and disparities. Like there's a lot of different things to do. And so I think, and I'll say this more forwardly, and Marty knows I often say this type of stuff to him, but like I think it's a cop-out to say what's the 2, 3 things. I think it's multiple things. And I think for all of us, it's like, yo, where do I have power? Where do I have influence? What can I do based on the influence, the rooms I sit in, et cetera? What can I do to influence maybe creating an opportunity for somebody else? maybe creating someone's mindset to shift on what does it mean to be a good black man, an articulate black man, in my case, right? My brothers talk totally different than me. They're from North Carolina, Greensboro, didn't go to Morehouse, and are still as valuable as I am. Would white people see me as more valuable than my brothers? Maybe, right? So that's where I go, right? In the conversation of like Black Lives Matter and how do we affect change, I think is looking at these things as a society, right? And I want to underscore, I don't think it's that we can create a utopia. I think that does not exist. I just think we got to all look at, where do I have influence and power, and what can I do from the seat that I sit in? And I think that is much more digestible, because I then do think that we can develop 2 to 3 things you can do. So last thing I'll say, again, told y'all I was from the Baptist church, is for me, right? I'm thinking, I'm at a tech company. I'm working in diversity, equity, and inclusion. By the way, it's one of the largest tech companies in the world. When I worked at Deloitte, I was thinking, man, I'm in a space where all these top 50 Fortune companies are thinking about DEI and trying to think about, what does this mean for their people? What does it mean for their shareholders? What does it mean for their, employees? I was helping shape the agenda with CEOs. And I'm not saying that to brag on myself, but like, wow, I was able to say, hey, here's, company X, here's the 3 things that y'all can do to like really enact change at your company right now. And so I'll probably continue to see that like impact as I think about like, my career. But like, that's what the mindset I'm saying we should like kind of think about those 3 questions. It's not just 3 things, it's a lot of things, but you have to examine yourself.
Hey, Deshawn, I think that, when I say 3 things, and I do this on every real estate projects, things I want to get done, I always try and break it down to that, because there may be 100 things on my list, but if I can't get 3 things moved forward and off my list and kind of tackle something, then I'll never get to the other 97. So, and it also forces me to prioritize and say, okay, what do I really need to get done, or what needs to get done first? So maybe the first thing is a certain study, or the second thing is something else out there. But I agree with you, Deshawn. I think this comes kind of full circle back to what we were talking about earlier with You Succeed and the mentoring program that you developed, which is, help yourself. You decided, with your own resources to kind of help yourself within that system. And then I think what that does is that inspires someone else to help too. Kind of like when we were in Africa and you had the villagers there that were working with us, they're plowing beside us in the field. That's more motivational than if, let's say, we came out there and plowed the field for them, because one, maybe we're not plowing it the way they want it, or we're not doing the right thing. So kind of working shoulder to shoulder. But I think it helps when you see someone kind of helping themselves and then you're helping with them, then everybody feels better about it rather than like one or the other. But I think that education, to your point, is a critical thing. And it's one of the challenges, not to hit on, while we're hitting, the reason we broke out the bourbon is because we were hitting on so many sensitive subjects here. But, the other part of it is both you and Odell mentioned that, growing up in single parent households. And I can tell you, in my house where I'm kind of the breadwinner, my wife was able to help with Alex, 2 of us raising one son is challenging enough to make sure that we're providing him the attention that he needs, the tutoring that he needs, and we're both college educated helping him. How do we break that cycle? Because we've got, an issue of just one person maybe helping, or one person that hasn't gone to college, then try, and even though I had gone all the way through MBA, sitting there trying to help with some of Alex's math, I'm like, God, did I forget all that? I mean, I don't remember this. We're helping with AP computer science. Like, yeah, I used to know this, but now I don't. I've forgotten it after, 30 something years. What are your thoughts on?
I kind of hear you saying, like, how do, like, and this is probably a question to Odell too, like, Odell, how do we clean our house is what I'm hearing. Like, we talk about generational influences that have led to things like, from our situation, single parent households, right? I think that's a whole different podcast and whole conversation, but we'll love your thoughts to Marty's question of like, how do you do that?
It's interesting. My mother was a divorced single mother. And I always said, God, if you would bless me with sons, I will be the father that I never had. And God blessed me with one boy. And I remember, so important you would ask this question. I remember rolling them over and I saw those two little peanuts, on them. And I said, okay, this is a boy. And I felt real good. And I'm just trying to pour everything in him. And then we planned the second child. And I remember the second one was born. He had a big old head full of hair, and I thought he was a girl. We rolled him over, and I saw two more little peanuts. I'm like, oh, man, God, I have so much in me that it's just overflowing to another son. And even then, I had my nephew on my wife's side of the family family's going through divorce. We moved him in and lived with us also. And I have been mentoring black males, my whole life. I have been trying to lead by example because my father wasn't there. I don't want to be chasing ghosts, but I thank God for a grandfather who showed me what it is to work, how it is to be a man, how it is. Was he perfect? No, but he was perfect for me. And I think that's how we clean our own houses or start. But at the same time, I had a white basketball coach, Coach Jerry Waters, who played just as much as a role in my life on discipline through sports than anything else. So I think that it's whosoever will, let him come, white or black. However, I think that as men of color, we have to take the responsibility to say, hey, how can we make a difference? And I just think that the good thing that you said is let's talk about it. Let's bring it out in the open because it's not like people don't know that 68% of black households are female led. I mean, all this stuff people talking about black people and dirty laundry. Listen, everybody know what's going on.
Hey, guess what? White people have dirty laundry.
All right.
Sure
Absolutely.
does.
Yeah, it's not just the black people. It's just, like you said, the murders are black on black. Well, that's noticeable. But all the white folks, I'll speak for white folks. Some of them just go, well, that's just the way they live.
Wait a minute. It's interesting, Bill. And the good thing about it, Deshawn, is like we're having a real good conversation now. Now the water's kicking in and the bourbon kicking in. It's just like, that's just those people. That's just the way they live. Yep. And I love Bill and you love Marty. And the good thing about it is we can have these conversations on the platform of trust and love.
Amen.
So we having these conversations, the fact that people who we know, even if what they say sound crooked coming out of their mouth or curvy, we know what they mean, and vice versa. If I say something that sounds crazy and Bill's like, boy, I don't like the way that sounds, but I know it's coming from Odell, so I know it's coming from a good place, and you the same way with Marty, we can agree to disagree. So when my good white friend, Bill, who I love and trust and respect, and we have a great friendship just like you and Marty, when he said, well, that's just how them people live. So my black folk out there, bring it back. It's okay. Bill's is okay. He's back. It's okay. It's okay.
Some people say that.
Right. Well, exactly. So to my black folk who ready to tar and feather Bill, Bill's good. Bill's good people. Go ahead, Bill. I just had to let him know. There you go.
My mama didn't raise no fool.
Okay.
But no, and you look at that, and I guess the thing I would emphasize is, it's such an over. And Marty brought it up. We all have hundreds of things to do in our daily routine, and same thing with this. This is a huge deal. Breaking down these barriers, it's not easy. So make it simple. Pick one person that you can start a relationship with. And have conversations. And it doesn't have to be a black. It doesn't have to be a Jewish person. It's just somebody that's different than you, that's not in the same circle, that gives you a different set of lenses to look through. And be patient. When they say things that will set you off, just settle down and go have a bourbon or a beer or a glass of wine. And if you don't drink, go out and have dinner and break over bread. And find that common ground that you can find with people. And it may have to be very simple. It may be just, hey, we both like fried chicken. Now, here's the thing. I like fried chicken. I think Kentucky Fried's good. Odell thinks that is terrible. And he says, I'm going to take and get some real fried chicken. So, but you have common ground. You like fried chicken. You may not have the same fried chicken, but you like fried chicken. So that's how I see this coming about and working on it. And I think Marty's podcast is a stepping stone to that. Ours is. And I think as more people do this and more people listen, we started out And Marty's going to do the same thing. Very few listeners. And then all of a sudden it starts building. Then you go to the next level. It's called responsibility. They're expecting you to be there, helping them with this journey and bringing on guys like yourself, Deshawn. So it becomes fun. Then it becomes not work, but a responsibility. And that's a total different thing.
To touch on something Bill said about, hearing other people and observing racism. I've observed that, all my life as well. And as somebody with a different last name, Marty Kotis, Greek name, I got a very tiny bit of that out there where, you're different. You're outside the norm. You're not waspy. And so maybe that's where some of my kind of understanding comes from on that. And there's there's biases against Greek people. I was in Charlotte with a guy, old restaurant guy, and I spilled some something on my white shirt. And so I asked for club soda and I'm scrubbing to get it out. And he says, yeah, you people are very frugal. I'm like, talking about Greek people. I was like, wow, that's really nice, huh? But you see that out there. And, I think, I've tried to, it's difficult sometimes, but I think it's important to do this. I have confronted that when I've seen it out there. I was in, outside of London, and there was this guy that made a racist comment about President Obama. Now, I'm not a fan of President Obama, but I'll be damned if somebody's going to say something racist about my president.
Amen.
So, I confront him about it. And I've had other examples like that where you have to step up. And it's not comfortable because I think a lot of times if it's not directed at you, you can kind of duck and it's not a big deal. Yeah. But it's important for us all to kind of speak up because in all communities, to defend others and to defend ways of thinking like that, if you disagree with them. And the problem is you take some heat. I mean, if you're sitting there having a conversation with, you said it was like cousins or something.
Yeah.
That can create a whole issue over that. And you got to balance it because you can't, you want to, there's two ways to respond. You can respond and be like, like I did with the guy in the UK where you're like, I'm never going to see this guy again. I'm going to really tell him what I think about him and his ideas. And then other times it's someone and you want to correct their viewpoint and fix it so that they don't carry that forward. And that's always a challenge out there. How do you, Odell or Deshawn, what do you think about how do you correct people when they have a bias like that towards another group? And how do you deal with it when it comes up, or does it come up when people are, I feel like it does some these days where people are maybe biased against someone because they're a white male.
Well, I think sometimes in my tribe and in my circles is the people like, Odell, I know I got to be careful what I say around you because you love white people. It's not that I love white people. I love people. And the fact that some of my best friends are white, or I do business with white folks, but I do business with black people. I'm one who don't believe that ice is colder on the other side of town. I'm not afraid of white people. I'm not trying to be white because those are some things that we get confronted with in our community where you're trying to act white, or you're trying to talk white, or you're trying to, man, listen, I'm trying to live. And if I find common ground with anybody, white, black, or indifference, that's the main thing. I am a licensed, ordained Black Baptist preacher sitting in a very influential seat of power and influence at one of the largest African-American churches in the country, or I would say Greensboro. We're not a black church but we're 99.99999% African Americans. And people are like, well, Odell, how are you friends with gay people or LGBTQ? And I think of some other letters, not trying to be funny, but I can't always keep up with them. IA. Yeah. And they're like, how can you get along with those people? They're not those people. They're my people. And people are like, well, wait a minute. How can don't you believe in Sodom and Gomorrah? Just crazy stuff. And I refuse, Marty, to buy into letting someone cowered me into saying something negative about friends of mine who happen to be LGBTQIA. And I challenge people on it. And I just think that if you don't entertain the foolishness, if I don't entertain that Marty's a racist or Bill's a racist or this person that, people don't bring it to you because it makes them uncomfortable when they come and tell you something and you don't buy into it and you question them on that. That makes people uncomfortable. So it's like, okay, he's not one of us. You know, you're not one of us. Back to your point earlier that now all of a sudden you're not accepted by this tribe. You don't get invited to the Christmas dinners anymore, or now all of a sudden it's that silent campaign going on against you. Well, Odell think he's better than this. Because let me tell you something about being black and growing up in the projects, my experience. I have a lot of family members who have done well, but I also have a lot of family members and friends who haven't. And I have to be careful as I code switch. And I have to be careful as I go back home and what I do, because I have some friends from high school who will get in my car right now. It's like, oh, man, Odell, it's good to see you, man. Can you let me borrow $20? But if the police come, they will take whatever drugs that they may or may not have in their pockets and slip it under my seat, and the police stop us. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the guy look at me like, hey, man, it's your car. And then I ask him later on, yo, bruh, why'd you do that? He said, man, you slipping. I already got 2 counts on me, you know? But it's like, here you are messed up my whole reputation. It's like, yo, bruh, you done got soft. You forgot how the hood works. So I can't get too soft to get taken advantage of by anybody, white, black, hood, urban, rural. But I can't be so hard that I don't allow anyone to come into my life. You know, because if that was the case, I wouldn't be on your show today. If that was the case, I wouldn't be with my good friend, Bill Goebel, today. And like Bill told me once, he said, Odell, 10 years ago, me and you couldn't do this show. 10 years ago, we couldn't talk about some of the tough issues we talk about now. Yeah. And I'm interested to have Deshawn answer it, but yeah, man, you just have to be who you are. And people know that, yeah, I'm down with the cause, but at the same time, I ain't down for the foolishness.
It was a process.
Yeah.
It was a process. It didn't happen overnight. And it's not easy. It's not easy. You know, we make it look easy. We do. But it takes real trust. And, you know, when Odell, I'll tell you a little story. We were at a big event in Greensboro, and kind of the who's there. Marty shows up. It's at Roy Carroll's Christmas party. And part of the deal is that we're sitting there, and Odell and Bev were sitting down having some food, and Dory and I sat at the table, and there's 2 people wall to wall. And Dory mentioned to Bev that we got a 25th wedding anniversary coming up, and that we're going to take a riverboat cruise from Paris to Normandy. And Bev says, I'd like to go. We'd like to go with you. Well, Odell and I were on the other side of the table. We couldn't hear what the girls were talking about until later on. Dory mentioned me. He says, hey, Bev and Odell want to come with us on the riverboat cruise. And I called Odell. I said, did you hear that? And he goes, look, if Mama wants to go, we're going. And next thing he knows, you know, he's telling us, okay, what do we book airlines? And well, they had booked the riverboat's not a big boat, and we had booked in advance, so we were on some deck that was above water. They got below water, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, slave ship. That's what I'm thinking. In addition to that, they were the only 2 black people on the boat.
On the whole boat, y'all. On the whole boat.
Were there other people underwater or just you?
No, there's other people underwater. Okay. Now that's how Bill saw it. We didn't see it that way.
That's how I saw it. Yeah. I felt terrible.
Right. And we were good with it. And we're like, listen, we're just happy to get on the cruise, meaning that it was last minute. We wanted to go to Paris. We did that. I have gotten to a point in my life where I look at things and I try to analyze it to see if it's about bias, prejudice, and stereotypes. When I get stopped by customs, whether I'm going into Israel or when we went to Canada, and customs just go through everything. It's like, are they stopping me because I'm black, or they're stopping me because they're stopping me and I just got the random straw. Sometimes I feel like it's because I'm black. Sometimes I feel like the random straw. I try to get through those situations and move on and don't let those situations determine everything. But it's interesting that Bill talked about the cruise because it's 3 different levels. We were down, and anybody knows, the last cabins to go are the bottom cabins. So we were down there. Bill and Dory was up above, and then we met a gay couple. 2 young ladies, 2 doctors, and they were like the top areas. And I remember they invited us for dinner one night in their cabin. It was me, my wife, Bill and his wife, and these 2 married white females. And we sit up there and we talked. And we just talked, just like we're talking now about all kinds of things. We had a great time. Now, 20 years ago, I couldn't have had that conversation with 2 white married females. I couldn't have had that conversation. And you're like, why, Odell? Because I had my own bias, prejudice, and stereotypes that I learned on grandma's porch. So I think as the Baptist preacher from the big church that I'm involving and I'm being more like Jesus, if that's what we're following, and understanding that my seat is not, I'm not the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I'm trying to be more like Jesus. What would Jesus do? I think the Holy Scriptures teaches us that Jesus interacted with any and everyone. And I think that's the point. So I love the fact that my friend said, oh my God, they're in there. But we being prominent as an African-American, you go into areas where a lot of times you're the only one. You're on the whole ship. I'm the only one. These rich white folks from all over the world on Viking International, we going up and down the Rhine River. We're in Paris. We're in this, with that. And so I'm up there, listen, I'm up there with everybody. I'm like, listen, I'm not going to be the one that if I walk in the room and a bunch of white people at the table laughing, I'm not even to a point of thinking they're laughing at me or the jokes about me. Right. I ain't got time for that kind of foolishness. So that's kind of where I am. But again, everybody's not me. And they may be laughing about Odell, but I don't have time for that because I'm going up to the smorgasbord and get me some caviar and some fancy ham that they don't sell in the projects or serve in the projects. I'm going over there. I'm doing what I'm doing. And sooner or later, and this is what usually happens, sooner or later, people are curious about me. They're like, what? Because what they want to say, how did your black behind get on this ship? How can you afford to get on the ship? They don't say it like that, Marty. They said, well, where are you from? And then we start the conversation because I expect the conversation to happen. And I think that's an opportunity to share with people about who I am and what I am, because in a lot of cases, a lot of folks never came in contact with black folk at such close, because I still believe that it's hard to hate up close. And when I step away, Deshawn, and say, hey, yeah, let's have a conversation. And they're like, oh, my God, I never met anyone like you. Is that good, bad, or indifference? That's for someone else to determine. But what Odell say is, here's an opportunity to teach and lead other people and help tear down some bias, prejudice, and stereotypes and go from there. Because if all I see on the media is black people killing, robbing, whatever, then I'm thinking Odell's going to rob, kill too. So it's like, what are you doing? So, Deshawn, that's my experience, But remember now, Sean, you owe me $20.
Right.
So,
I mean, y'all said it all. I mean, I don't have anything else to add on that statement, honestly. Like, I feel like that covers it. But I would say to even the theme of the podcast, Marty, around like independent thinking and being a maverick, I think what I'm hearing as a theme for all of us and a lot of these these stories that we've shared is an independent thinker has one curiosity. I think we've all talked about, opening up the conversation, thinking about, what can I do, right? It's that curiosity that you have as an independent thinker. I think that helps shape your own perspective further. And then the other thing is you kind of have to have vision for what you're trying to accomplish, right? Even, I jokingly said cop out to your 3 questions, but I will seriously say, even within that lens, what I hear is, as a strategy person, your mindset almost always results to what are the 3 takeaways to impact change now. And I think as an independent thinker, that's very, very important. I'm even thinking back to an experience that I've had over the last, decade of our relationship from a vision perspective. I mean, I can't tell you how many times you and I have spent, days, hours, looking at something like red mud on the ground, and you telling me, man, this is going to be like, a movie theater. It's going to have the seats. It's going to have this food. You're going to be able to serve the popcorn. Like, thinking about Red Cinemas, one of your projects. And if you think back from my perspective, I'm looking at red mud and I'm like, Marty, it sounds good, but I'm looking at red mud. What are you saying? And what is like so beautiful about it is, as a independent thinker, is you have that vision and that strategy. And so because I live in Atlanta, I'm making my point that almost every time in the last 10 years I come home, I'm hitting you up like, yo, where you at? What's up? You want to get a beer? What are you and Ashley and, Alex doing? And so because we have that relationship as well, right, I'm able to like more fully appreciate a vision. And so as, because I'm only able to come home every so often, I'll see like, oh, the foundation is in, right? I'll come back 3 months, 6 months later. Oh, wait, there's like paint on the outside of the building. Give it a year's time, couple months. Oh, wait, there's like a foundation. The paint is in, is on the building. There's like seats in the chair, seats in the theaters. And now there's people, and like people are enjoying it, right? Even to your Daryl's project as an example, right? I don't tell this people often, but I was also like one of the first employees Marty had when he re-envisioned the concept for Daryl's back in 2011, was it, Marty? 2011?
2010, yeah. And
so I was,
and you were in, a great kids concierge as well.
Exactly. I was barely legal to have a job, y'all. So the man employed me, which I always appreciate a little bit more bread. But my point is, as an independent thinker, right, that's now helped me shape when I'm having conversations with the CEOs or CHROs or chief legal officers about what's possible for their business. I use the lens of, man, let's not look at like just patterns and behaviors of what we know exists. How do we envision, right, a new future together? And I think that's part of, the independent thinking mindset. Even when we talked about, politics, I'm like, yo, where's my voice in this? Where is the voice of millennials? It's like trying to decipher how we shape it together through a vision, and obviously based on values that I personally have. That's where I start to action. Similar to Marty, right? As a business owner and investor, etc. That's what I see from your perspective. So I know it's tangential, but I just wanted to say, like, that's one thing that I'm hearing us all say.
Right. And it's interesting. One of the things that people say all the time is you learn from experience. But as soon as you say that, and those words go from your tongue over your lips, the question is, how do you learn from experiences you've never had? Because in a lot of cases, I had to look at other individuals because I have never been involved in building $1 million operation. I've never been involved in how to be a great father and now a grandfather. So I love your point of find a mentor, find someone, and it doesn't matter about race, creed, or color. It's like, that's it. Because if not, you may mess it up. And unintended consequences, all of us are still consequences. And let me say that again. Unintended consequences are still consequences, and everybody's not a visionary. Everybody can't see it. And I love your examples. Like I'm looking at Red Clay and Marty talking about people eating popcorn, but some people are afraid of that, though. Some people are afraid of visionaries. Some people are afraid to say, hey, I grew up in public housing, Odell, but my mama told me 3 things. She said, you could be anything you want to be in life. And it was a lie. My mama told it. And I'm from the project, so you can't call my mama a lie because that's a fight. She said, you get the best education that you can. Never look down on people, and you trust God. Now, it's like, how you mean the best education that I can? Because you said, Deshawn, hey, you could get a good education at a bad school or a bad education at a good school. It's up to you. So I got the best education that this poor black boy could get. I try not to look down at nobody other than to help them up, and I'm trying to trust God. Am I the perfect Christian? No. I'll let Bill, Marty, and you take that role, but I'm just trying to make it in. So I love this conversation because we're talking about stuff, man, that people don't want to talk about. And so I thank Marty for hosting us as Mavericks to say, hey, let's have these conversations. And yes, it's going to make people uncomfortable, but sometimes we need to be uncomfortable. Bill, help your brother out. Help your black brother out, Bill. Help your black brother out.
Let me give him a lead in here. So to wrap this up and kind of get us on the final leg, and Bill, add in whatever you want as well. But what advice would you give others? Let's say someone's listening to this podcast and they say, hey, I want to be a maverick. I want to be an independent thinker, but I'm afraid, or it comes with some repercussions out there. What can you do to help encourage them or find a pathway to that independence and expressing themselves?
That's a great question. As you were saying I was trying to reflect on how Odell and I have been doing things. And, I'm one of finding the path of least resistance. And let me explain that. As a scout, you're taught to go and hike. Well, you can hike up a rocky trail, you can hike up some cliffs, or you can say, I'm going to go around that one and I'll get to the same place. It may take me a little longer, but I don't have to fight that right now. And so my advice is, for those folks that say, man, I'm afraid to step out, that's just not my comfort zone. It's just not in me. That's not my style. That's not my personality. You may be right now, but 10 years ago, I couldn't have done this with Odell. It wasn't there. It took some time. It took some lens changing. So take small steps, and then, believe it or not, you end up being a maverick.
Wow. That's great. That's my man. That's my man, Bill. That's my, LaShawn, that's my man. You hear my man talking?
Hey, Odell, that's what I do.
Odell, how about you? What's your advice for people wanting to become a maverick?
I think that they need to do their research. Case in point, if you want to talk about race relations, if you want to talk about LGBTQIA, first respect other people's spaces and understand them. Don't judge them, and find someone who you think you could have small conversations with. But at the same time, know for sure that you're going to get criticized. Know that you're going to get attacked. Know that people are going to call you everything but a child of God. Know that people are going to not like you. So if you have the disease of wanting people to like you, I wouldn't advise them to do this. But if you have the disease of enlightenment, then this is for you. I would love they could contact you, Marty, on your show, and you're going to have to tell people how to get in contact with you on your show. And we would love to talk to them and help them. But at the end of the day, you have to be someone who's willing to fight the good fight and really you care, because I care about what people say about me because I'm human like everyone else. However, I'm not going to let someone else's opinion of me paralyze me from moving forward, sir.
Great. Deshawn, got some advice for potential mavericks out there?
Yeah, I would say, thinking through the context of my life and some of the stories I've shared, I think I could have easily became a person that's like, yo, I've got all the answers, or man, there's too many answers to kind of think through where do I even start. And so, my advice is two things. One, be very comfortable being wrong and challenge your assumptions and beliefs around that, and get a community of people who tell you you're wrong, number one, and two, help you get a new perspective. So that's one thing. And then I think the second thing is really, this whole piece around curiosity and being hungry enough to learn more. I think without, shutting out, if you start with shutting out conversation, shutting out different perspectives, shutting out, even challenging your own assumptions, you really won't get to a place where you learn. And so I think, last thing I'll say is just, continue to be hungry enough to learn more. So again, recap, get comfortable completely being wrong and hungry enough to learn more.
That's great. Y'all have already covered almost everything I was going to say. So
yeah, but Mark,
I'm going to have to add three new things because you've already covered the stuff I was going to say. But the three new things I'd add are, travel and, and visit and get a world perspective on things, like with Dustin's greenhouse. Go places that you're not used to spending time. Don't get in the same rut. Get out of your routine and visit other places and meet new people and have new conversations and feel comfortable being bold. I love the quote, "Fortune favors the bold." The other part of it, I'd say, is Matt Green, who worked with me, that was a Marine sniper, always would say, when you get rattled a bit, he would say, "Stay frosty." And that's the idea of keep your cool. And I think that's probably what I would give for my main piece of advice for people is stay frosty. When you're having that conversation that's difficult, don't let your blood pressure get jacked up. Don't get enraged. Don't take it personally. Have that reasoned, comfortable conversation and don't let it get under your skin. So then that will if you keep your tone and your even keel, then somebody else hopefully will keep theirs if they're having it could be one person, it could be a whole group that you're talking to. And that's something you have to practice. It's not something that comes easily because there's an immediate react where you want to engage. But I think over time you can find a way to stay a little bit more frosty.
Marty, one question for you. As a maverick, you started this podcast, and thank you for inviting the three of us on as your inaugural guest. Why did you start this? You have more things to do than this. Why? What's your why behind this show, sir?
So I think my why behind the show, and I'm going to spend more time both on video and on audio, is a lot of times I'm talking through the media, and that's through a lens that someone else is taking. So the media has a perspective and I'm commenting and it's part of that, or I'm pitching a story maybe to the media, but someone else is telling my story and talking about things. And I don't really have a chance, they're editing, they're cutting out certain things. And now I can just give someone an unfiltered, raw version of what I think and what other smart, intelligent, reasoned people are thinking out there as well on a whole variety of subjects. It could range from what we covered today to, it could be something that's more lighthearted. We covered a lot of stuff today, from lighthearted to serious as well. But I did it to have more of that glimpse. And also I think it's so part of it is cutting out the media and having a chance to kind of talk directly to people out there and give them a glimpse into what's going on. But the other part of it is the art of conversation is being lost. And this is a way to remind myself and give myself and others an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation without a TV on, or, because you can have a conversation in a bar, but maybe the TV's on or there's other things. And this is just purely focused on it. So it's like meditation, but for the mind, where you're thinking about different concepts, you're articulating them, and you're conversing. And it's just, I find it very rewarding. Right now I feel super chill and relaxed, and I feel like I've learned a lot of new perspectives. And that's why I like talking with people that are like-minded in terms of their ability to have a reasoned discussion and not fall into these tribal or conformist boundaries, but instead break out of that and share ideals. Because I think there's a lot of us like that out there, but I think there are a lot of people that are afraid to find their inner maverick out there.
Well said.
So we're going to stay frosty, my brother. We're going to stay frosty.
That's it.
The other thing that's going to happen out of this, and I took a while to think about ours, and 100 years from now, your great-great-grandkids are going to say, what did my great-grandfather sound like? What did he think about? Wouldn't you like to know that about your great-grandfather?
It's funny. I was having that exact thought this morning driving in, and it was reminding me of a street artist in the Netherlands, Digital Does, and he took me to show me some of his old artwork. And it was hidden, really, not everybody could see it, so it wasn't like out there in public display, but he painted it where it was so that it could be kind of tucked away. And he said he did that so that his sons could later come back and explore and see that, and it would remind them of him. And I thought that was another side benefit to that as well. Not to get emotional here, but, we're all wanting to leave our mark on this earth. and for our children or loved ones or descendants to hear you and hear kind of who you are, and not just see it through the lens of the media, but see it through your own conversation out there.
Exactly. We had Randy Reynolds, who owned Reynolds Wrap, on, and his whole motivation was exactly that. I mean, he had stories because he was friends with Putin. He was friends with all those guys because they had mines over there. But his real motivation was, I wanted to tell stories that won't be filtered, that my great-great-grandkids say, what did Grandpa Randy sound like?
That's great. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Deshawn, for participating via phone. Odell and Bill, thank you for joining me in here. And
our pleasure.
It's I had a sound effect queued up that I was going to do that was the listen, listen, listen. I am the captain now.
Come on, 102 down. Marty listening to 102 down.
He got his black card.
Whoa, that's deep in the black cut, Marty. 102 down. You're now rocking with the best.
Just splice it in.
But it's nice. Thank y'all for inspiring me too to get into the podcast world, and being so generous to let me on your show a couple times. And for as we wrap up here, for people that have not followed Bill and Odell's show, it is the formal name of it is
thecommonground.show.
Commonground.show.
Yep.
Is the website.
Yep. And that will get you there, and all the podcasts are on there, and you can listen to Marty's too. And actually, folks, I'm going to tell you, he's gotten better the second time.
He's got that voice. But you know, Marty, the thing about it is that we talked about tough subjects, but we also put a little humor in there because we understand the levity of the toughness in our subjects and how it might weigh on someone. But the humor lets people know that you can have tough, very poignant conversations, but also have a little bit of humor in there too. Because like any good medicine, sometimes you need a little sweetener for it to go down. And the thing about it is, we didn't go with the Hannity and Combs argument. Yes, we agreed to disagree, and everyone stood their grounds, but we were civil and respectful of everyone. And I think that's where the country is going to have to go, because if we're only just talking to people who agree with us, we're really just talking to ourselves. And now we're in the echo chamber. And when you talk to yourself and start answering yourselves, that's when we get a little off the rails, my friends.
We'll have to do another one of these again, since I got to keep up. If y'all have 2 with me, I got to have 2 with y'all. And of course, I'm sitting here keeping you for like 3 hours on this one, so maybe like 5 shows in one. But
yeah, that's it. You know, we're happy to help. And Deshawn, is great meeting you, sir. And I look forward to networking and meeting you too. We come to Atlanta quite often, flying in with our producer down there. So this is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and Deshawn, definitely when you get in town, give Odell and I a call. We'll join you guys for some food. And
definitely will.
Sounds great.
Definitely will. Nice to meet you all.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Again, make sure to check out commonground.show with Bill and Odell on there. And they have a very interesting podcast. Today's podcast, I had a chance to learn from Odell and Bill and Deshawn and really get to understand their various perspectives on some difficult issues. Race is not an easy topic to cover, and it's very charged, and people can become kind of tribal in their various camps where you align with one group or another. I think in order for us to find more common ground, like Bill and Odell do on their podcast, we have to have conversations that are difficult, and we have to find that independent thinking or maverick personality to have those conversations, because we're breaking from our tribal groups. Our groups where we belong, where we feel comfortable as a Democrat or as a Republican, or identifying with one group or another. As part of that, we have to be willing to look inside. We have to be willing to look at things that we can change within our own groups or our own actions in order to find more common ground out there. I'm thankful to my friends Deshawn, Bill, and Odell that are willing to sit down and have these conversations in a non-threatening way, with a sense of humor and with a sense of curiosity, hoping to understand more about each other's perspectives. Something that would really help me with this podcast is any sort of feedback from you, the listeners, letting me know what you think. If you get a chance and can write a review on one of the podcast platforms, that's great. And tell me what we can improve, how we can make it better.